This episode is brought to you by Ghost Patch. Ghost Patch is a law enforcement-owned and operated company specializing in patches, coins, and flex shields. Quality is top priority with low prices. They always offer free design work and never charge mold or setup fees. Stop letting the big companies rip you off and check out Ghost Patch at ghostpatch.com and ghostpatchcustom.com. Now to the next story.
Quicker that you come to do EMDR after something has occurred, probably the better off you're going to be. And with first responders, I have used it with police officers for like officer involved shootings, and it was very effective. Now, I will say that it took a little bit of time, but this was also like less than a year after the incident had occurred. I really wanted to specialize in PTSD. That was when I was going to school, the whole entire time, even from bachelor's on, was like, I want to work with veterans, our military, active military, and I want to work with PTSD. Again, because we are opening the door, closing the door, like exposing you so frequently, we also have to stabilize you before you can leave, because again, you're going to leave and you might be really raw and emotional, and we need to make sure that you have the tools in your toolbox to cope with that until you walk back into the door. That trauma can get triggered again, right? And your amygdala is always scanning for threat. And so when you have trauma, your amygdala gets tripped up a lot and it fires and it sends those chemical messages, and we get into our sympathetic part of our nervous system, and our hippocampus can't identify, is this currently happening or did that happen in the past? And so we have that full-blown trauma response because we don't know if it's currently happening or not.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Welcome back, folks. One day I was at a DFW mental health conference that Dallas PD was actually hosting. I got to meet a lot of amazing counselors and field experts that day. Then I was approached by two ladies, sisters in fact, who told me they were fans of the show and really liked what we were doing with the Dallas PD's wellness unit. Then they started talking about some trauma therapies, some that I was familiar with and others I was not. EMDR was discussed, and something I had only heard whispers of, but I didn't quite understand. ART, Accelerated Resolution Therapy. And as they talked, I began thinking about the power of education, and education being one of this show's missions to empower our listener. So after months, the sisters, Laurie, Todd, and Heidi, Johanson, came down to the wellness unit and sat down for a discussion to educate us so that we can understand these treatments. And we can have more weapons in our tool belts to battle something that everyone that puts on this badge can be susceptible to. PTSD, and all that comes with it. Please welcome on Heidi and Laurie from the Healing Counseling Center as we discuss EMDR versus ART therapies. I want to welcome on Heidi and Laurie. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having us.
The listeners are about to really get to know y'all, but also I want to introduce a special guest co-host. She's sitting in for the first time. She's one of my peers in the wellness unit, Nicole Glass. Say hello.
Hello.
Kent Wolverton is here as well. I'm not letting him speak yet. But anyway, you and I met, we had a DFW support group here that's in the area, and we hosted one of the meetings we had, and basically it's a network of counselors and people in the mental health field. And y'all came out to DPD, and I met y'all for the first time, and y'all said y'all liked the show, and
We basically forced ourselves here.
We did.
yeah,
We were like,
We
have
approached
us.
you.
We approached you.
yeah. Well, y'all started talking, and I was like, you were talking about EMDR versus ART. I know EMDR very well, and we're going to get into that, but also accelerated resolution therapy. I did not know about that. I know we talk about it, and a lot of our ATO counselors do it, but I want to know, and I want the listener to understand the differences between EMDR and ART, and then also we're going to talk about a lot of other things that are technical that this platform is used for inspiring, motivating, but also educating. And, at the very least, you'll hear a comical or just cool story.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have all that in this. So, but are you
Lots of
ready
good stuff.
to dive into it?
Yeah.
We are so ready.
Laurie, Todd.
That's me.
All right. Tell us about yourself.
Okay. What do you want to know?
Middle
Just kidding.
sister.
Middle sister. That's me. So I am. Well, it's hard because I'm going to tell you a lot about myself, which also includes a lot about Heidi. But
I'll probably interrupt her.
Yeah,
'cause
she probably
we
will.
interrupt
This
each
is
other.
what
all
we
the
Just
time.
did.
Yeah.
There we go. So I am, as a human being first, we'll start there, from Las Vegas. Born in California. Our family moved to Las Vegas in 1989 and grew up in Las Vegas, which is like such an interesting experience. Obviously, it's not a place that a lot of people live. Like, I don't think people really think about Las Vegas, like the outskirts. They ask all the time, like, did you live in a hotel? Yes, I lived at the top of the Excalibur. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's not a thing. So,
Not the Fremont.
no.
Kind of low rent.
right. Yeah. Shrimp cocktails for dinner every night for 99 cents. Yeah. So we kind of like grew up on the outskirts of Las Vegas, and I am the middle sister. So there's 3 of us. So we have an older sister that is 2 years older than me. And then
You better mention her name because she'll listen.
Julie.
Okay.
She's going to listen. I'm going to
She
make
is
her.
gonna- Julie is actually our practice manager. So she also works with us, and she's a blessing. She kind of like keeps everybody in line. So Julie is the oldest. I am the middle, and then Heidi is the baby. So we grew up in Las Vegas, which is a very fun experience. Obviously, made college very, very fun. I went to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV.
Running Rebels.
Running Rebels. Hey, Reb. You know, that guy. And I got a degree in psychology. So
What year was that?
2008. Thank
I know you better than you know yourself.
Like, listen,
I have a really good memory.
2008. Yeah. So I graduated from UNLV. I graduated from high school in 2003 and then graduated from, yes, that tells you how old I am. Listen, next year I'm going to be 40. Ooh. Here we go.
I'm going to be 50 next month. So, yeah.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So went to UNLV and got a degree in psychology. And at that time, I really, really wanted to be a occupational therapist. Or a maybe not so much a physical therapist. Occupational therapy was something that I really wanted to do, or speech therapy. And so after I graduated, I went to Nevada State and I did some classes in occupational therapy and speech therapy because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And throughout that process, I was like, I'm not really enjoying this. This is not really what I want. I thought I wanted to work with children for a very, very long time. And the older that I got, I was like, listen, I don't know that that's really my passion. It is a great passion for someone to have, but I just don't know that it's mine. So
Yeah, I want to ask you though. That we have a lot of officers and that they contact us for issues with their kids, and we find that it is hard to find.
It's so hard,
and especially in a certain age range that they only start seeing them like 12 and up, and there's like a gap.
yeah, the littles are so hard. It's really hard because you need to have you really need a play therapist or somebody that specializes in that. And they are out there, but 9 times out of 10, they're full because there's more people who want to treat adults and teens over, 13, 14, 15, 17, instead of like little kids.
Because it's just a different specialty, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
specialize. I mean, you get the same degree that we have, but you have to specialize in play therapy, and that can be a whole
certification.
To be a registered play therapist, you have to kind of get extra supervision that you have to pay for, and it's a whole other specialty on top of it. So it's hard to find.
And I think it is very much so like where I struggled with it is I like my clients to talk back to me,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay.
And so that's kind of where, when I was going through that program, I kind of realized I just don't think this is right for me. And so I decided to, still living in Las Vegas, to get a degree, my master's in counseling. So, and I met my husband there, not at school. We were bartending together. In Vegas, this is a thing. You make a lot of money there.
I bet.
Oh my gosh. I would make like $300 a night, $400 a night. I don't have any of that money anymore. It's all gone because I lived in Las Vegas. So, you know, having a great time. Best time ever.
So I read in your bio he had to grow on you. So explain that.
Him and I, he's going to listen to this and he's going to be like, tell the right story. So, my husband,
It'll be a version. It's
a version.
Yeah, it's a version.
So my husband's name is Eric. So, and we've been together for 15 years. So I know that I don't look old enough to be with somebody for 15 years, but I have. We've been together for a long time. And so we were both working at a place called Gordon Biersch, which was a restaurant brewery, and they had one really close to our house. And he was working there. Kind of an interesting story. I had been working for the company for quite some time, but I was working at another location, and then I moved locations. So he had already been working there as a bartender, and when I started working there, they were like, hey, this is another female that we can put behind the bar and make people like, you know, buy more beer. Okay, because that's what we do, right? So,
well, you were bartending at the other location.
I was also
already,
bartending
too.
at the other location. So they were like, this is easy. We'll just throw Laurie behind the bar. We don't have to train anybody. Cool. Eric did not like that because whatever. So I
took his shifts.
Took his shifts basically. He was pissed. So, like the first time that I ever met him, my husband's from Hawaii. So he had just gotten back from Hawaii and he had never met me before. And we were like crossing paths, I think. And I was like, hey, my name's Laurie. It's nice to meet you. And he was like, I cut lemons for you. They're on the counter. Have a good shift. And I was like, ooh, that guy sucks. He's a dick. And I was like, okay, fuck you. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry, Eric.
Sorry, Eric. Love you. But then over time, we became friends and he kind of grew on me. So, and I think I grew on him. We're very, very opposite from each other, like incredibly opposite. Heidi will tell you. He is very much so like
very logical,
very like calm,
organized.
He probably should have been a police officer because he's very good in a crisis. And Laurie, like I'm good in a mental crisis, but like there was a fire in our house one time and I was like out the door, like I didn't have kids at the time, but out the door, like him and the dogs in there. I didn't even care. I was like, toodaloo, I got to save myself.
Or if a moth flies in.
Yeah. I mean like bugs. Yeah. So we were very, very opposite from each other, but we did end up really loving each other. And I think we are good. We complement each other because he needs some like liveliness and, you know, he likes.
He's very quiet.
He's super
doesn't
quiet.
Say a lot.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't be a good interview. Right?
Yeah, he would say like two words.
You can talk to him about brewing beer, and he would love to talk about that. But yeah,
or Eagles football.
Oh yeah, he's an Eagles fan. Sorry.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Philadelphia.
Yeah, Philadelphia Eagles. And now my son is too. He taught my son to name all the football teams that he doesn't want to like, which are all the teams that our family members like. So James was like,
no, not necessarily. We don't like the Chiefs.
oh, he said that one too.
No, he doesn't like
No,
the Chiefs.
he said he doesn't
yeah,
like the
we
Chiefs.
don't like the
I know.
Chiefs.
James said,
Okay,
I don't
just
like the
making
Chiefs.
sure we're on the same page about that one.
He said, I don't like the Chiefs. I don't like the 49ers, except when they played the Chiefs last year at the Super Bowl. We wanted them to win. I don't like the Buccaneers, which is Heidi's husband's team. I don't like the Cowboys. Yeah, he like has a whole list, and so he's an Eagles fan too. So.
There's no Eagle fan that loves Cowboys, or even
Oh, yeah, of course
no,
not.
mildly
it's a rival.
likes them.
Well,
Yeah.
the only reason that Eric, I'm pretty sure, likes the Cowboys is because, or likes the Eagles, I'm sorry, is because his dad is a Cowboys fan. So they go head to head. So, but either way, we kind of grew on each other, and we started dating in, I think, like 2000. I get this wrong all the
I
time.
think that it was 2009.
2009, probably.
Because I graduated in 2010.
Okay.
And
so
that was,
probably.
I met Eric for the first time in 2010.
Okay, so in 2010, and about a year into our relationship, so I was getting my master's in Las Vegas, and Eric got a job opportunity here in Dallas, and Heidi was already living here, and she'll tell you her backstory in a minute, but she was already living here, and I like called her on the phone, because Heidi and I have been incredibly close, probably after high school, like midway through high
like
school.
after you graduated high school.
Yeah, so I am 4 years Heidi's senior. Okay, so
Doing the math.
Doing the math, yeah. So, but we've always been incredibly close, and so when she moved here, I was very, very sad because we spent a lot of time together. We always have spent a lot of time together, except when we were little, we fought a lot. But that's pretty.
That's because
normal.
Laurie was mean, though.
Listen.
Mean to me.
Like taking my shit
So
all the time.
I'm pretty resilient.
She would like come into my room and destroy my Barbie house and like drive her car into it. And I'm like,
no. She would try to like get me out of her room, and she used to have this trundle bed, and it had like these posts on it. And I used to take my hands and wrap them around and get like this death grip.
Probably why you have an incredibly strong core.
Very strong. And I was holding on to it, and she would like pick up my like body basically and be like pulling me.
We are
and
both so strong.
hanging on. I'm like, I'm not leaving. I just really wanted to be her friend, and she just was like, get away from me.
I accepted you later in life.
And y'all have a business together. Wow.
We do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two businesses
together.
Damn, okay.
Yeah. Yes,
We do everything
We do
together.
everything together. So
Even podcast together.
Yeah, even podcasting. We live in the same neighborhood. We drive the same kind of car. Our kids go to the same school.
We do the same workouts.
We're ridiculous. We do the same workouts.
We've had several jobs at the
Together.
same time.
Yes, like Heidi used to work at Gordon Biersch too. So
Yes.
like this is our life. So, but my husband got a job offer here in Dallas to work at the Gordon Biersch that used to be in Dallas off of 75 and Park Lane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, do you know where that's at? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and my husband is a brewer. He brews beer for a living. So, he currently works for Union Bear in Plano, right off of 121 in the Dallas Tollway. Go visit Eric. Woo! So, anyways, but so he got a job
Go
offer
visit him
here.
and ask him for a tour.
Well, yeah, go ask him. He'd say yes.
Ask him for a conversation.
Yeah, be like, Eric, tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
I met your wife. And he'd be like, oh, God. So I called Heidi and I was like, oh, my God, I think we're going to move to Dallas because the choices were either to move to Dallas or Buffalo, New York. And I just didn't know if that was going to work out for me because I don't really like to be that cold.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so I said no. So we ended up here. And so when I got here, I needed to transfer schools. And so Heidi was already going to SMU. So what do you think I did?
Yeah.
I'll go to SMU too. So went to SMU, got my master's from there in counseling, and I graduated from there in I think 2000 in this. I think just was it 14 or 13? 14.
Man, it's a good thing you have her here.
Seriously,
Spring of 14.
spring of 14.
Because I graduated in winter, December.
Oh
of
yeah,
13.
we were just a couple months apart.
What is
So,
your certification?
my certification is I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor.
Okay.
But my master's is in counseling, Master's of Arts in Counseling.
Well, this episode, we're going to talk about a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
EMDR and ART, and then we have some other topics, but that's why I want to get both of you on, but I want the listener to understand your specialty.
Yeah.
And sounds like you have multi-specialties.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Heidi, you're up.
Okay. Well, Laurie forgot a part of her story, though.
What's my story?
When you were going to SMU, you were working with children on the spectrum.
I was working with children on the spectrum, and
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh well, maybe I'll like try this and like it, and it was very rewarding, but also incredibly challenging. And so I decided to do more private practice stuff, and that's where I really found like the trauma piece of things and like how incredibly impactful some of these treatment modalities that we are going to talk about are. And then Heidi and I, we can talk about, I don't know if you want to talk about this now or later, but us deciding to open up our own practice, really,
We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll
but
get there.
yeah, so that's where how I got into counseling just in general.
Well, I'm going to ask this while it's on my mind, but so you're dealing with kids,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're dealing with grown-ass men and women that are first responders and non-first responders.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma started when they're kids that's unresolved.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's y'all's job is to kind of
Mm-hmm.
point that out and also and uncover that and
Yeah.
pull it out in the open and then remedy it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we've both worked with kids and
Mm-hmm.
adolescents throughout the course of gaining our experience. And I think having that experience to see the different developmental stages that we go through is really helpful when you're
Absolutely.
working with adults that have complex PTSD. because you can see the full picture. And when they tell you, oh yeah, I was 8 years old or I was 12 years old, I know what an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old presents like because I've worked with them in therapy, right? And so I can understand their development, how black and white they were at that age, what they were experiencing outside of their home, in their home. It's just a different perspective when you have that experience of working with different ages. And so when I supervise licensed professional counselor associates, I'm usually encouraging them to get varied experience because that experience builds you as a whole clinician instead of just gravitating to like one specialty. You can have something that you want to work towards, but I think it's really good to try different things and see how it feels, right? Do you like it? What do you earn? You're going to learn something from it. It's an experience, and that's going to help you in the future wherever this field of mental wellness, mental health takes you as a counselor.
You're a supervisor as well? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well,
okay.
Tell us about you,
Get it.
Okay, so...
The baby of the family.
I am
Yes,
the baby.
oh my gosh.
I am the baby, and probably the favorite, if we're being honest.
God. Mom said the other day that
Okay.
I never ask her for anything. So
She told me that too.
Oh my God.
Which basically
Okay,
means
fine.
we're saying Julie is the one who asked for things. Sorry, Julie.
Sorry, Julie.
So I am the baby. And I'm actually the miracle child. So, they didn't know that they could have another one, and here I came. So anyways, I'm just playing. So anyways, I'm the baby. We moved to Las Vegas when I was like I think I had just turned 1. And so I don't really have, obviously, very many memories from living in California, where we came from. So grew up in Las Vegas, and I mean, it was a very normal childhood. Yeah, I know people say like, oh, I had a great childhood, but we were blessed to have a really good childhood. Yes. Our grandparents lived next door. We had a very close relationship with them and
with
our
whole
aunts
family.
And uncles.
Yeah.
So we had a really good upbringing in Las Vegas. We lived in Henderson, so we were about 15, 20-ish minutes from the Strip. I also went to UNLV. So I graduated high school in 2006. I graduated a year early because I'm an overachiever and like to challenge myself. And if something is going to be challenging or hard, I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to be really stressed out and overwhelmed, but I'm going to complete it.
Let Laurie know
Yes,
about it.
1000%.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. And she'll usually do it with me if it's something she can join in on.
I'll be mad at her.
Yeah. So I graduated in 2006, and I knew that I wanted to be in the field of psychology. I knew that from, I took a psychology course in my junior year of high school, which was really my senior year. And I fell in love with brain science and how our brain works and conditioning and behavioral part of it. I just was like, oh my God, I love this. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Which before that, I had many things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a veterinarian the bulk of my life. And sometimes I'm like, maybe
That's what my daughter wants to do.
That should have been the thing. I love animals. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not going back to school. No time for that. I'm tired. And then I thought I wanted to be a journalist for a moment because I really love to write. And I did yearbook and I did school newspaper and I just really loved writing. But I was like, that seems kind of hard. And my mom was like, yeah. And a lot of times they make a lot of money. So that seems like you're going to have to hustle pretty hard. And I was like,
okay, well, look at us now.
I know. I'm still hustling.
Yeah, you're talking about something being hard, but you're talking to people usually at the worst time of their life.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm going to major in psychology. So I went to UNLV as well because we all went to UNLV because in the state of Nevada, they have a scholarship program called the Millennium Scholarship, where if you get a 3.0 or higher all 4 years of high school, then you automatically get the scholarship.
I would have made it.
Yeah.
And they pay for a bulk of your college
They
credit.
used to give you $10,000. I don't know what they do now.
Well, they pay like a certain amount per credit hour. And so your tuition that you owe is like very manageable. Yeah. So you would have to either go to UNR or you go to UNLV or any state school in Nevada. So I chose UNLV because we don't like UNR. So, and I didn't want to live in Reno.
They stole our canon.
Yeah. So went to UNLV, graduated in 4 years. I majored in psychology. And while I was going to school, I met a boy. He's actually a police officer now, but I won't say what department because, I don't know. So I met a boy and he was moving to Dallas and he was like, you should move with me. And I was like, well, I'm getting ready to graduate. I have like 1 more year. I'm going to have to go to get a master's in counseling, but I don't want to stay here. I'm not staying in Nevada. Like, I knew I was going to leave for my master's. I just wasn't sure where. So I was like, all right, that sounds great. So I moved here I was 20.
Had you ever been to Dallas before?
I had visited him. So he moved before me, and I had came and I had visited. And so I was like, all right, whatever.
Like 2 years before I moved here. I think you've been here.
I moved here in 2009 and you moved in 11.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Did he move here to become an officer?
No, he moved here. His parents moved here.
Okay.
His dad worked for Southwest Airlines. So he was like, he got relocated, got a job promotion. And so my boyfriend at the time, I almost said his name. My boyfriend at the time was like, I'm going to move there because my parents live there and there's a lot of opportunities there and different schools I can go to. And at the time, I think he really wanted to like be a PA. And so that was what he was thinking of doing. So he moved here. I can't remember when he moved here and how much longer I moved here, but it was probably like 6-ish months, I think. And so I moved here and I was 20, and that was like a very big culture shock for me, because not just because of Dallas, but being on my own, like really on my own, right? Like, I mean, we lived together, but we had our own apartment. It was like I was the 30-year-old when I was 20, and I knew nobody here besides him. So I had no friends, I had no family support, and we grew up in a very close, tight, and we lived next door to our grandparents, and all of our family probably lived within a 5-mile radius. So this was like, whoa, I'm like here alone. This is really challenging for me. And it was a great experience, though. I mean, I grew up, I learned how to survive on my own. I became very resilient. And, you know, even like small things, like my car is making this sound and I don't know why it's making this sound. Like normally I would just call my dad and he'd listen to it and tell me, or I'd call my grandpa and he'd listen to it, or I got a flat tire. You know, I was like, I have to like figure these things out. Like I have to like take it to the mechanic, and how do I find a mechanic, and all these things. So I lived here, and then I would fly back and forth, though, pretty often. So Laurie moved here in 2011, and I was, like, pumped. I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be fabulous.
Yeah.
And I started so when I graduated from UNLV and got my bachelor's in psychology, I was like, all right, what do I, like, really want to do? Do I want to get a PhD in psychology? Do I want to get a master's in counseling? Do I want to be a psychiatrist? Maybe I want to be a nutritionist. What do I exactly want to specialize in, and what do I want to do? So I took a year in between undergrad and my master's, and I tried different things. I volunteered in the psych unit at Presby Dallas. I worked at a private practice and just kind of did like their scheduling and helped out with billing for a while. I just ran some groups for the private practice. She kind of had a grant with someone, and I ran some groups with her. I just tried on different things to see what kind of fit. And I landed with counseling. And I was like, I think I want to get a master's in counseling because I think it fits what I am like finding out that I want to do. And so I looked around, decided on SMU, and applied and got in.
And by then, SMU is amazing.
It's a great
staple.
School.
Yeah,
it's so fantastic. So expensive as well.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So I got my master's in counseling. So I started before Laurie, since she wasn't here yet. So I started before her, and then I just loved SMU. I thought it was one of the best experiences. It was also a culture shock, though, because I had to pay for my own school and pay for all of my own things. And so I was like, Thank God we had some sort
of scholarship for the other part of it, right?
I remember calling my mom, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, where are these people getting this money? She's like, Heidi, it's called a trust fund, and you don't have one. So I'm like,
and you will not
I don't.
Have one.
You're right. So it was a little bit of a culture shock, but I made a lot of really great friends there. I have still talked to most of the people I was close to when I went there. But so during the time I was at SMU, Laurie moved here, and then I broke up with my boyfriend. And so that was huge,
because I moved here. That's
not because you moved here. There were issues. And so we broke up, and we needed to break up, and we're not each other's person, and that's fine.
It happens.
Right. And we were young. That's just what happens when you're young. So we broke up. He had to move out, and so then I had this like townhome that I was living in, and I was like, oh, I can't afford this. This is expensive. And so Laurie found a girl that we went to school with, and was like, this girl Gabby needs somebody to live with. Do you want to live with her? And I was like, I don't care. Can she pay half of the rent?
Yeah.
She can live with me. So she moved in. So it was really cool because we both went to school at the same time. So it was just really nice. And graduated from SMU. Oh, I forgot to mention, when I was going to SMU, what I was doing for a job was I was working at an outpatient drug treatment center called ATO in Garland. And we had a contract with Dallas County for probation. So we would get anybody that was on probation in Dallas County for substance issues was coming to ATO, and that's what we were doing. And so
Are they still going?
I don't know if they're still going. So the owner of ATO used to be a Dallas police officer, Jay Harrison. And long time ago. This is a while ago. So he ended up opening ATO after he retired. And then he did that for a while. He was obviously like a lot older than me. He just would make me laugh. He's like, listen, if they walk like a duck and they talk like a duck and they quack like one, it's a duck. I'm like, okay, let me apply that to substance, And he's like, and if they tell you they're using 5, they're drinking 5 beers a day, is times that by 6, because that's probably the realistic number. I'm like, okay. So I worked at ATO while I was going to school. I actually got a lot of other jobs while I was going to school because stuff is expensive. And then when I graduated from SMU, I worked for the crisis line that serviced 7 counties. And that was an experience in itself. But I feel like I learned a lot of really valuable things in terms of assessing risk, because our main purpose was to assess for suicidality and homicidality. So, and we would go, just 2 clinicians presenting to people's homes all over the Metroplex, which
I was not a part of that.
That
is not a job that we shared.
Not a safe job.
Yeah. No. What were you doing?
So while Heidi was doing that, this is a part of the reason that I decided I didn't really want to work with teenagers or kids really, is I did my hours at school at Timberlawn Psychiatric Hospital in East Dallas. And I worked in the child and adolescent unit and teens too. And it was kind of like Heidi's experience at the crisis line. I mean, I learned so much about the DSM diagnoses, but it is also, I could see how you could get incredibly burnt out doing a job like that for years and years and years. The turnover rate's super high, but it was obviously a lot of trauma and a lot of like little kids coming in that, I mean, like, who knows where their parents are at, and now they've been traumatized, or there's so much psychosis, and it was a really good experience. And then I was also, but I knew that like, okay, I don't know that I want to work with little kids in this capacity. And then I was also I like to open up businesses. So at one time I owned a business where Heidi mentioned I was doing applied behavioral analysis, like behavioral therapy with children on the spectrum. And I opened up like a business. So I was working at an autism treatment center. And then I realized like I could make so much more money if I was just like getting clients on my own. And that's what I did. So I opened up a business on the side, and I was doing applied behavior analysis with kids on the spectrum. And I would go to their homes and I would do behavioral therapy with them and work with their family and their parents. And so I did that while Heidi was working at the crisis line. And then I also worked at a private practice in Dallas. So getting some like clinical hours while I was an associate.
No, we're hustling. So,
yeah, I had like 3 jobs. I was doing the crisis line. I was working for Innovation 360, which does mainly drug treatment in Dallas. And then I was doing some ABA with Laurie on the side because it paid drastically higher than what I was getting paid.
Paid her well. And then you were making balloon animals.
Oh, yeah. That's my
Heidi
secret trick.
You got any balloons? Heidi make
I can make
Damn,
balloon
I wish I'd have brought
animals. I used to work at the Magic Time Machine. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I worked at the Magic Time Machine.
In Addison?
And I made balloon animals, and I just worked off of tips, and I would make like $300 a night.
Making balloon animals.
Because I obviously wasn't getting paid very well at ATO, so I had to make balloon animals on the side, So but I worked at the crisis line, and then I started working in private practice because I kind of found my footing. And I really wanted to specialize in PTSD. That was when I was going to school, the whole entire time, even from bachelor's on, was like, I want to work with veterans or military, active military, and I want to work with PTSD. And I also kind of had a passion for working with substance use. I really enjoyed the crossover with substance use disorders and PTSD. But that is a high burnout area of this field. And over time, it just became less and less of my passion. I know how to work with it. I'm comfortable with working with it. And once again, I think it's important to have that experience, especially working with first responders, because there is a high use, there's a lot of substance use going on in first responders. And so the information that I gathered in that was great. Just the population that I had been exposed to wasn't what I wanted. And so knowing that I wanted to work with military and all of that and PTSD, at the time, it was just really hard to kind of get into that because veterans don't seek services on their own. They go to the VA, right? So unless you're working for the VA, now we have TRICARE, and so it's a little bit easier. But I wanted to work with first responders. And
why is that?
I'm kind of an extreme person. We do have, our grandfather was in the military, both sides.
Have a very
we have
large
a large military
presence.
background presence in our family. Nobody currently is in the military, but I like extreme things, right? Like I worked at the crisis line. That's extreme. I volunteered in a psych hospital. That's extreme. Like if I'm going to work with like PTSD, I want to work with like the
Full
worst
throttle.
of the worst.
Yeah.
I want the worst trauma you can give me, right? And that happens with first responders. And also because like we need to take care of our first responders. Totally. I like have a heart for that because of just our own family's background with it. And I actually thought about joining the military at one point, but I don't think that I'm cut out for the military because I don't like to be told what to do.
Probably not.
So I just was like, I think that first responders is what I really want to work with. And so when I was working in Dallas, I started at a private practice. I started getting some on my caseload, just naturally started happening. And I loved it. I was like, this is great. This is the best thing ever. I got trained in EMDR in 2016 because my supervisor was very passionate at the time about EMDR. And she was like, you got to get trained in this, especially if you want to work with first responders and you love PTSD, you got to get trained.
What year was that?
I got trained. So I graduated from SMU in December of 2013, and I got my associate license in September of 2014, and I did my EMDR training in May of 2016. And then I got my full upgrade to LPC in September of 2016. So
when did y'all join forces and start your practice?
Well,
Yeah.
shocker, we were working at the same private practice. I know that this is shocking information, but we
use the same supervisor. We work together. We live in the same neighborhood. We do all the things together.
Yeah.
So we were working at a place, and I loved it. It was great,
Yes.
but they were kind of just going in a different direction than what
But I also
we
think
wanted
for
to
a very
do.
long time, Heidi and I had talked about like, hey, at some point we want to have our own business, right? Like we had worked together a million times before, and we knew we want to have our own private practice. We just don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know where we want it to be. We don't know what we want to do.
And like, what's the timeline? We didn't really have like a timeline. We kind of thought, oh, well, we'll wait until Laurie gets her full upgrade to LPC, and then we'll like kind of see where we're at. But things just happened a lot faster than we anticipated.
Well,
and
because
so,
I got pregnant in March of 2018, and I was like, listen, we got to open up our own thing because, again, this practice was just going in a different direction.
well, they were
which is
just
great for them.
We were
They're so good.
1099s, and they were going W-2. And once again, I don't like to be told what to do. And
Yeah.
Laurie's like, I'm going to have a baby, and I want to have flexibility, and
Yeah, and I want to be able to attend my kids' programs and be able to be a room mom if I want to and go to lunch with them or whatever. So we decided to open up our practice in June of 2018. And so Heidi and I had picked McKinney because there weren't a lot of services at that time in McKinney. And we were living where we live off of 380, which is, a really beautiful place in itself. And so we were like, we don't want to go too far from our house, but also we don't want to be right next to where we live either, just access wise for people. And so we decided on McKinney, and we had rented these like two tiny little offices in like a Regis, which is like executive suites. And so we were there, and I was very, very pregnant, and I thought that I might have my baby in this like tiny little room at some points because it was so hot. They would turn the air conditioning off at 6 p.m.
Save money.
Yeah.
And I thought that I might die.
Oh my
but
God, it was so hot in there.
Yeah, it was so hot. But we were getting a huge influx of clients. Like we could not keep up, and Heidi and I could not take all these people.
40 people a week.
Yes, like I was working till like 9 o'clock at night. So every day I was like, we have to hire other people. And so what Heidi and I, when I went on maternity leave, Heidi was like, I can't take all your clients. I'm like, well, no, because you're seeing so many people, I'm seeing so many people. So we ended up hiring somebody to basically help out. And he actually also was a veteran, and he was a military life counselor, and he treated first responders. And so, along with many, many, many other people. And at that time, Heidi and I were both seeing first responders here and there, but it wasn't like the majority of our caseload. Both of us were trained in EMDR and had a passion for trauma. But this whole first responder thing evolved later, but we ended up hiring somebody, and then we just kept getting call after call after call after call. And so I had my son in December of 2018, and in March of 2019, we expanded, and we moved to a different space in McKinney that had 4 offices, and we hired a couple people. And we had been in that space, and Heidi and I are very passionate about all we want to do is like serve our community in whatever capacity that we can. And so we didn't realize that area of McKinney was so underserved, and I don't know why. It's really like the border of Frisco, Allen, Plano.
I think it's just like the perfect area because you're just pulling from so many different places. Yeah. And I mean, we like just got lucky. We didn't really but
we are now?
So we stayed there, and then during COVID, we obviously worked from home for a little bit, but we had an influx of clients during COVID, like people calling in for telehealth, but also once we could go back, in person, people were like, we want to come in. So we ended up getting another space in the same complex that we were at. And we were outgrowing that too. So in December of 22, we expanded again, and we also had an office in Colleyville, Irving. We've been a little over everywhere. So we expanded to a much, much larger office in December of 22 off of Coit and 380. And so that's where we are currently at. And that office has like 11 offices. I think we have like 20 therapists in there. And then we have an office in Louisville now as well.
And what is the name of the
Healing Counseling Center?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I should probably mention also that I am married. I have a husband.
Oh,
I
yeah,
forgot
you got
about
one of
him.
those,
Sorry, Aaron. I met my husband after I had graduated from SMU, and I was working on my hours, and we met on Match.com. How lovely! And
you should tell them they should use that as a story.
I know he always says that.
Oh.
He's like, they should interview us. I'm
Well,
like,
it's because
oh my
Aaron
God.
had a coupon. That's the
Yeah, he's like, it's because I had a coupon. I'm like, oh my God, you're so cheap. So we
Y'all met on a 30-day free
Yeah.
trial.
Yeah, that's basically what it was.
And so we met in April of 2015. Yes, 2015. And we got married in May of 2017. And we have a daughter that's 2.5. Her name is Ellis, and she's the best thing ever. I love her to death. And we have 2 dogs, Moose and Peyton. They come to work with me regularly.
Hopefully they'll listen. They'll listen to the show.
I know. Peyton is a service dog, so she comes with me. She's kind of unstable these days, though, so she might have to retire.
Oh, man.
She's got a problem with police officers lately.
should have brought her here.
Oh, I could have totally
God, you guys
desensitized
could've
her.
desensitized her.
No, she's fine as long as they're not in uniform.
Really?
The uniform freaks her out. I don't know. Once I got pregnant, she got weird about it and was like, ugh.
She's hiding something.
She's fine with
Got crazy
firefighters. Doesn't bother her, but the uniform, it's the boots and it's the whole thing,
Really? Wow.
Freaks her out. And then Moose is not anything special, but he does come to work because he's very empathetic. And
Shout out Moose.
Yeah, I get it, Moose.
So we opened our own practice, and then we were getting first responders here and there. And then we got connected. Barbara Crump reached out to us.
Yeah.
And she was like, I thought she was not real at first because you get a lot of weird emails that are not real.
She left me like 3 voicemails,
And then she
I
started
thought,
calling
I was like,
us, and I was like, okay, I think this is a real person. So we met with her in September of 21, I believe it was. And she was like...
Yeah, I just had Haley. I have a daughter that's 3 as well. So I just had Haley.
Like, hey, I work for this nonprofit called 3FTL, and told us all about 3FTL. And so we started working with them and getting a lot of referrals from 3FTL. So now both of us, our caseload is pretty much mostly first responders. Yeah. I mean, I obviously still have clients from what I just being in practice for so long. I have clients that are non-first responders or civilians, but
I'd say it's like 90.
Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
first responder heavy.
First
at this
responder
point,
heavy at
and
this
that's
moment.
what I prefer.
And that's what I like. Yeah.
Are you on the Blue Chip program?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, we're starting to push that out more to our people that...
Good.
Because we have a lot of folks that live up north,
Yes.
especially out there. And yes. Okay. I'll be... I'm going to be presenting that more to our details with the Blue Chip program. And I'm glad to know you are one of the providers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at us. We love
Yeah.
it. We love to give the services.
Yeah. So mostly first responders.
Yes,
And
we love our first responders, and that's why we are passionate about ART and EMDR.
Speaking of,
Yeah.
so I want to get into the history of EMDR. I did a little bit
Let's do
of homework. In 1987, Francine Shapiro realized that eye movement appeared to decrease negative emotions associated with their own traumatic events and memories. She added other elements, cognitive component, developed a standard procedure known as eye movement desensitization.
Desensitization.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
you
hate
got
that.
it. There you go.
You were there. Yeah.
In 88, she conducted research and studies on EMD and intro researches in Israel and organizations U.S. And we're going to get into, we had Tanya Glenn on, and Tanya was kind of doing it early on when it was looked at as kind of like the chiropractic of medical.
yeah.
It was kind of getting shit on when it started.
For sure.
Nobody
believed it.
believed in it.
It sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy.
Well, yeah.
She presented in 1990. She presented the first EMDR training as a licensed mental health pros in the U.S. University of Pennsylvania, Virginia research team got involved, and it was declared a breakthrough for treatment of PTSD at the time. And do y'all know that it started off kind of looked at as military,
Yes.
and it hadn't kind of got into the first responder world yet.
Anything to treat PTSD is always going to be
Studied by the
researched
military.
on
Yeah.
military, right? And
They have a lot
prolonged
of funding.
exposure has been kind of the standard treatment for PTSD, and it is actually prolonged exposure is actually the most researched treatment method for PTSD, just because it's been around for so long and they've poured so much money into it. And people still do prolonged exposure. I'm trained in prolonged exposure, but I don't use it
What
on
is
people.
prolonged exposure?
Yeah, explain
So
that.
prolonged exposure is just like what it sounds like. So it's exposure therapy. And so basically you have the client come in, and I believe it's 12 weeks long, if I'm remembering correctly. And week after week, you do a 90-minute session with them, and you basically have them recount the traumatic experience over and over and over again until they are desensitized to it, until they don't have any response to it, and they're not showing as heightened symptoms of PTSD, right? So they're not avoiding the triggers that normally would send them into a flashback or having an emotional response. They're able to go about their daily normal routines of life. And so just recounting it over and over and over again, basically because you're doing it over and over again, that exposure to it, because every time when you suffer a traumatic event, your brain, your amygdala hijacks your brain, and the rest of our brain kind of goes offline. And one of the areas that goes offline is our hippocampus, which is responsible for memory consolidation. And that's where we process away and file away the memories. And the hippocampus also tells us what is the past and what is the present. And so when that amygdala gets hijacked and we experience that trauma, we have a really hard time identifying, is this current moment, or what moment am I in? And if I can't retrieve the file that goes with this moment because it's not filed away, then I don't actually really know what's happening to me. So when we experience that trauma can get triggered again, right? And your amygdala is always scanning for threat. And so when you have trauma, your amygdala gets tripped up a lot, and it fires and it sends those chemical messages, and we get into our sympathetic part of our nervous system, and our hippocampus can't identify, is this currently happening or did that happen in the past? And so we have that full-blown trauma response because we don't know if it's currently happening or not.
And for that prolonged treatment, how often does that take place? I mean,
Once a week.
I think once a week.
Once a week
Okay.
is the standard
what
protocol.
percentage of your clients do you have to? How often do you have to do that as a?
I have never done
clinician?
prolonged exposure.
Okay.
So full disclosure,
yeah.
I did a prolonged exposure training last December because it was free. And I was like, I just want to see what this
Had a coupon?
is.
Yeah, a coupon.
The free trial.
So our clinical director is trained in prolonged exposure and has done it with clients. But once she got trained in EMDR, she stopped using it. And then once she got trained in ART, she never used it again. So
And I would never.
I was just
on a
like,
first
let me
responder.
get the science behind it. Let me know what it is. Just because if I'm going to treat trauma, I want to know all the treatment modalities, and I want to make sure that I'm using the best protocol for that client, right? Because every client is different, and I don't think I would ever use prolonged exposure, but I am trained in exposure response prevention, which is a treatment for OCD, and that's the gold standard for OCD. And I had just done the ERP training, and I was like, well, I feel like prolonged exposure would be a good compliment because I just
Why
did
not?
exposure therapy training, so let's just do it for free.
I keep thinking of the Ben Affleck movie where he turns the lights on and they flash and the loud music and he's beating his shins with a stick the whole time. Is
Yeah,
that
that's basically
Yeah.
what it is.
That's-
They showed those videos in the training.
No,
yeah.
it's pretty awful. So I mean,
try that later.
Yeah, let's try it later.
So the military really backs prolonged exposure
Yeah.
though, because they have a lot of research done on it.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, that's really when we are saying something is evidence-based to treat PTSD, we've done it. We've worked
the
with
military.
military veterans in some capacity, whether it was actually through the military or not, we've worked with veterans because
Yes.
that is, you're just going to see the highest incidence of PTSD in that population.
yeah, because it's such a large group of people.
Yeah. So for the layman and simpletons like
Yeah.
myself, can you explain EMDR?
Yeah.
I'll explain it because I
You wanna do it?
I'll do it.
Okay, I'll
'Cause
do
you
ART.
Yeah. So
Heidi and I did these trainings the last, we've done a lot of mental health trainings recently, and so Heidi usually goes for ART.
But I'm going to do EMDR today because
You do it. I'll do
I
ART.
did some research on it before we came on. I mean, I am trained in it, but
Y'all just crash course it before you came in here?
Yeah, we're like, listen.
No, I wanted to be prepared. I like to be prepared, and I wanted to make sure that I explain it because I haven't actually had to explain it in this type of capacity
Let's
in a
do
while. So
it.
I did some research for
Let's go.
y'all. So once again, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it is an evidence-based treatment method for PTSD. So we use eye movements or bilateral stimulation in EMDR, which bilateral stimulation is a fancy word for basically your eyes move back and forth and we're able to access your left side of your brain and your right side of your brain. So logic and feeling. And with that bilateral stimulation, we really are kind of mimicking REM, right? And REM is our overnight therapy that we get naturally. And so when we sleep and we go into REM cycles, we dream and we're able to access parts of those dreams and file it away in our hippocampus and consolidate it and make sense of it, right? And when we've suffered something traumatic, our brain knows that trauma needs to go, that it can't stay there. And so that's why we get nightmares and that's why we have dreams about it. And they usually have a theme to them, right? Over time, we dream about feeling helpless or feeling not good enough. They have the same theme. And it's basically our brain's way of saying, hey, this needs to go. This can't stay here. You need to process this away because it didn't get filed away when you were hijacked by your amygdala when it happened. And so every time something trips us up, a sound, a smell, taste, something, right? One of our five senses experience something similar to that, our amygdala fires, and we have this repeated acute stress response over and over and over again. So EMDR really takes kind of that science behind REM, and so does ART, right? But we take that science of those eye movements and what can we do when we're not sleeping with those eye movements. And so they came up with EMDR. And so what EMDR is 8 phases. And so you have your assessment process, which is the first phase where you're just gathering the client's details, right? And you're understanding what they've gone through, the traumas they've experienced, and you're looking for some dissociation that they may have, any psychosis. You're just kind of ruling out some things that you wouldn't do EMDR on or you'd have to use a special protocol with. And then you have your preparation phase, which is the part where you're going to start prepping the client to do EMDR. So you have to do some resourcing with them, teach them grounding skills, depending upon what they're coming in and presenting with. There may be other treatment modalities like CBT or DBT that you may use because EMDR is incredibly emotionally provoking. And so in between sessions, you've got to be able to ground and stabilize yourself. So as the clinician, it's my job to teach you those skills before we get started. And then you get started with the actual EMDR sessions, which is the stages 3 through 6, where you're coming in and you are identifying the worst part of the memory, what the feelings are associated with it, what you feel in your body, and what is the negative cognition that you hold about it. So when we suffer something traumatic, we often learn something negative about ourselves in the process, right? Whether we feel helpless, hopeless, I'm not good enough, I should have done more, we learn something negative. And so our brain a lot of times will file away those traumatic memories. Like if you think about like filing cabinet and that's your brain, it's like, okay, if I've experienced a trauma and I couldn't process it and file it away correctly, what I learned about myself in the process is I felt very helpless and hopeless, or I'm helpless, right? Or I'm powerless, helpless, weak. And so it takes that file and it just like sticks it in the cabinet that's like, I'm helpless, right? And every time you experience something else, that starts to become kind of your negative belief that you just hold about yourself.
It's like a life theme.
Right, a theme of life. And so every time I experience something traumatic or something at all that I can't explain and file away, I'm just like, I'm helpless, put it back in the file. I'm helpless, put it back in that folder.
And you're dealing with people like was first responders and military that have way more exposure to traumas than general most people.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they enter the field with trauma.
And they want to be problem solvers.
Yes.
And then not being able to solve it just compounds it. Yeah.
Yeah. With my clients, and Laurie would agree too, my first responder clients, like I'm hopeless or I'm helpless. I felt helpless or I'm hopeless. Is one of the biggest ones that I hear with first responders, because you're going to calls where the outcome has maybe already been decided before you arrived, and
You're
there's
just cleaning it
nothing
up.
you can do, right? And but you feel that because you want to help people, right? That's most of the time people get into this field to help people, right? And you want to help and you want to save people and you want to do the right thing, but it's already been decided. And so now that leaves you with this feeling of like helplessness, right? Or hopelessness.
And I think I'm not good enough is a huge one that we see too in first responders, because sometimes there is childhood trauma or there is military trauma or whatever. And it's like I don't feel like I didn't do the right thing on the call. And so I'm trying to constantly prove to myself that I am good enough by going out of my way and getting 10,000 certifications and making sure that I run the highest acuity calls. Like, you're constantly trying to prove to yourself or other people that you are good enough. It's an exhausting process, right?
Also, I think that happens too a lot in first responders because of the way that like rookies, how they get trained
how they're treated right?
It's like that you
drink from a fire hose immediately.
Totally.
Right. And you're
scrub
kind of like,
the toilets,
kind of has
this,
historically been this like, let's break you down so we can build you up.
We can have the rookies scrub the toilets.
Yeah, that's a thing in the firehouse.
I did a lot of that.
I need a couple rookies at my house.
Yeah, right. Can I get one?
Helpful.
Is this equivalent to like moral injury? Like basically, you couldn't. You wanted to do something to have a different outcome, but
nothing.
It just didn't happen.
Right. And so we have that negative cognition. So EMDR really focuses on cognitions. That's what we're focusing on, is the thought, the belief that you hold about yourself from that traumatic experience. And so we go through that processing phase 3 through 6, and then you have your closure phase in phase 7, and then 8 is you're kind of examining what has changed, what has gotten better, right? But EMDR, when we've done a lot of the research on EMDR and when it was created back in, the early days, right, in the 90s, we weren't taking health insurance, and we were doing longer sessions, and we could just do whatever we wanted. Well, I couldn't because I was they were kind of just freeballing it, right? Because we didn't have the structure that we do now, right? And with taking health insurance, we don't do 90-minute sessions because that's not what's covered. And most people, even if they're not taking health insurance, are only doing a 50 to 60-minute session. Yeah. So EMDR, a lot of the research where they say like 1 to 3 sessions or 3 to 6 sessions of EMDR, a lot of that was 90-minute sessions. And so when you have a client come in, so let's break down what EMDR stands for, because I think this will help clients or anybody kind of understand this. So you have the desensitization. So where the desensitization comes in, so we know from prolonged exposure that we have to get to desensitization for trauma to heal, right? So with that being said, what EMDR does is every week you're going to have an EMDR session until that target that we are working on is desensitized. But we're not going to go, if you have this traumatic memory, we're not going to go straight towards it. We're going to ask your brain to freely associate and go to all of the other areas or all the other memories that you have ever felt not good enough or ever felt helpless.
Which could be a lot.
Which could be a lot depending upon who you are as a person, right? So that desensitization comes from you come in this week, we open it up, we close you off and ground you. Next week, rinse, repeat. Do the same thing over and over. So you're getting that desensitizing, right? The reprocessing comes from continuing to go down those channels that we have in our brain and opening up that filing cabinet, and we're reprocessing this time that you felt not good enough, and then this time that you felt not good enough, and then this time that you felt not good enough, right? So we're reprocessing that, and what we're going towards is basically getting you to start to feel like I am good enough, or I did the best I could, right? And that's what we're looking for when we do EMDR, is a neutral or a positive response. And until we get that neutral or positive response, we don't do the the rest of the other parts of the protocol that we have to do, right? Like installing the positive cognition and these other things and working to scan your body to see if there's any distress left. We're really just focused on that negative cognition and going down all the channels until we get desensitization or neutral response or positive response. So as I'm saying this, it sounds like, okay, that could be pretty lengthy, depending upon who you are as a person, your experiences, how soon you're coming in post the incident happening.
Or how frequently you're coming into session.
Yeah.
And sometimes what Heidi and I, what we see when we were doing a lot of EMDR is like, obviously, like when you have a relationship with your client, if you are my client and you're coming in and you sit down, it's really hard to be like, let's just do EMDR right now. We got to get started right now. We only have 60 minutes, right? So a lot of times y'all want to come in and tell me about your week or something has happened, but we also like know in the back of our mind, well, we got to do a little bit of EMDR, right? Or else like this is going to take us forever. So it's like by the time you get in the door, you sit down, you tell me about your week. Maybe we're starting at the 15-minute mark. So that gives us only about 30 minutes of processing. And then again, because we are opening the door, closing the door, like exposing you so frequently, we also have to stabilize you before you can leave, because again, you're going to leave and you might be really raw and emotional, and we need to make sure that you have the tools in your toolbox to cope with that until you walk back into the door 1 week later, or hey, maybe you're taking a vacation, you're being gone for 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's the hard part with EMDR is you kind of have to go around what's going on in that client's life. So if they're in a situation where they already have a lot of heightened stress because of job or because of life circumstances, they're going on vacation, they travel a lot for work, then it really, in the EMDR protocol, it's like, don't start EMDR. You kind of have to wait until there's like this lull in this person's life or they're stabilized to be able to do this. Because when we do EMDR, it's like, I used to tell my clients all the time, it's like we take the rug and we're just going to dust it out and all the particles are going to flow and they're going to be in the air. And so I'm going to ground you when you leave. But in between now and next week, that trauma is just floating around. So you're going to get triggered more. You're going to have some distressing dreams possibly. You're going to have some heightened emotional states. You're going to be distressed more than likely. Things are going to trigger you that maybe don't normally trigger you. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And I can't really tell you how long that's going to take because only your brain knows.
And that's why we have such an emphasis on like that preparation phase of making sure that clients who are doing EMDR have lots of different tools in their toolbox to prepare them for that process. And sometimes that can take a little bit of time. And you cannot do EMDR on somebody who's suicidal. It might make it worse.
Okay, can you explain that? Go into a bit more on that.
Because we are doing what Heidi said. We're shaking the rug out and there's particles flying in the air. Well, if you are suicidal, you already are feeling helpless and hopeless. And the more that you experience and you're looking and you're opening the door and you have to look at the trauma, it's really hard sometimes if you don't have the right coping skills and you are that helpless and hopeless to be able to cope with that in like a week's time or 2 weeks time. And so we really need to make sure that when we start doing EMDR, our clients are in the right space and they are not having any sort of suicidality, like not even passive stuff.
Right.
Like we don't want any
because we
of that.
like by ethics, we want to do no harm, right?
Yeah.
So like if they're suicidal,
It
we could
could
be
make
doing
it
more
worse.
harm.
Well, a lot of people aren't really that necessarily forthcoming with that.
Right.
How
It's kind of scary to think about, right?
It is scary,
Because
but how do you
Assess for that.
So I think
People
like
hide that shit.
when we have clients come in, we can tell absolutely when they have those feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. And again, like they don't come in and say, I'm hopeless today, right?
Yeah.
They're telling us by, lots of different
Expression.
things, right? Like, hey, if, Heidi used this example the other day at a training. My ex-wife's taking me back to court. How many times am I going to have to do this? I'm not getting to see my kids. I'm drinking too much. I'm blah, 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 blah. And so that to me says, I'm hopeless or I'm starting to feel a little bit helpless. And so I don't know as a clinician if I want to make the decision to go down this road of opening up all these boxes and letting you go from my office and spend who knows how much time trying to recover from what we are, exposing your brain to for 1 week's time, right? And so
you have to do a lot of prep work too, even in the
Yes.
assessment phase of assessing for suicidality and asking the hard questions. And as a clinician, like we are trained to know the right questions to ask, what we're supposed to look for, what heightens the risk, what lowers the risk, right? And so we have to do that. And we also have to assess for dissociation because if somebody has the potential to dissociate and not be oriented to place and time and to like what we're doing in this process, then we might not do EMDR on that person because we need them to be grounded. We need them to be here and now, right? And with trauma, there's a lot of dissociation that occurs with especially childhood complex trauma, because dissociation is our brain's natural way of protection and preservation, right? And so you can do EMDR on someone who dissociates, but it is a different protocol that you have to get trained in. So they would, there are different types of EMDR now that have come out where people have created dissociation protocols. There's an addiction protocol. There's a grief protocol. There's all these other protocols.
Well, some people could check all those boxes too.
Yeah,
right?
1,000%.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you can do the other protocols if you're basic trained in EMDR, but you may not really be the best to be doing them if you haven't been trained to do them and you just bought the book on Amazon that's called EMDR Protocols for Anxiety Disorders or something, and you're like, well, let me just pick this one and try it. You don't really know what you're doing. And that's probably not the best practice because you could do harm to your client. And so in the EMDR protocol, it will say, like, if you have a client that is blocked or they're looping or they can't get through something, then you need to refer them out to a more seasoned clinician or EMDR supervisor. You need to refer them out to somebody who has more experience in doing EMDR than you.
Let's say I'm coming to you and I had a bad call. It was a 7X. I saw a family killed. That is bothered me. I haven't been able to sleep. I keep thinking about it. I come to you with that, and you're evaluating me to do EMDR. What are you looking for when I'm saying it pertaining to that traumatic event, that call that I went on that it's bothering me? Is there times that other things from the past or even a call that's close proximity that comes up that's actually contributed to that, what I think is wrong with me? But did y'all kind of figure it out?
Yeah. So basically with EMDR, like I said earlier, we're kind of dancing around what you came in with, right? Maybe you came in with that call, right? But we're going to ask your brain. So first we're going to ask you, what did that call make you think or feel about yourself negatively? And you might say, I feel helpless. I feel like I should have done more. Okay, then we're going to ask your brain, when was the first time you ever felt that?
Hopeless, helpless.
I should have done more, right? And we're going to do eye movements, and we're going to let your brain just do its work, and then it's going to come up with this time in third grade, right? It could be that one, but you may say, oh, well, there was this other time. Oh, there was this other time. And so we are trying to find the target memory that holds that cognition. So even though I'm presenting with this trauma, I need to find out if that's truly the first time you ever experienced that cognition.
We typically work in EMDR for the first time you felt that way, the worst time you felt that way, or the most recent time. And sometimes
not
that does
recent. You do first or worst, but you are also, unless you came in right after it happened.
Yes, if you were coming in like a couple days later, then we would probably
just pick that one.
Go with that. So
you mentioned the eye movement, just for, again, explain it to the listener out there. We talk about EMDR all the time on the show. We have been since we started. Explain the eye movement. How do you do that?
So
you can do it many different ways.
Hand. So with ART, you only use eye movement. With EMDR, you can use eye movement, or you can use pulsers, tappers that kind of tap back and forth. You hold them in your hands and they buzz back and forth. But if you're doing eye movement specifically, the clinician just basically raises up their hand, and you sit in front of the client and you move your hand back and forth, and their eyes just follow your hand.
How hard is it? Because whenever I'll talk about my EMDR sessions with Dottie, but I had a hard time focusing on doing it. How hard is it?
Yeah, so it's like
totally common, I think. A lot of times people
common. And
also, like, how vulnerable are you ready to be, right? Because sometimes it's a very vulnerable process. And so a lot of times we have clients who come in and they are like, I can't stay focused. I can't stay focused on your hand. And it's like, okay, sometimes it really is like, it's hard for me to track. It's hard for me to follow. But a lot of that too could be like vulnerability.
So in EMDR, we would say, if you're having a hard time focusing, just notice that you're having a hard time focusing. And we're just going to let your brain go where it wants to go.
And then everybody's like, well, that sounds awful.
In ART, we would tell your brain to focus.
Yes.
We would say, tell your brain to focus and don't worry about the eye movements.
And also the person that's trying to do it and trying to focus, they had to actually believe in it. Because there was a time when I remember there was a time that I was like doing it and I go, this is bullshit. I mean, this ain't gonna
totally
work. And that's
we have
probably
clients
common.
do that all the time.
bet.
That they come in and they're like, this isn't working. It's not doing anything. Well, I know that it does something because there's all this research, right? And I've done it with many people, ART, EMDR, and it does work. But you also have to have a willingness and you have to want it to work as well.
Once again, like, okay, so if we were doing EMDR and you're like, this is bullshit, this isn't going to work, I would say, okay, notice that, right? So now we're supposed to be working on this trauma over here.
But now we're noticing the
bullshit.
bullshit.
Noticing the bullshit. We're noticing that you can't focus on the eye movements. Like, we have to notice all those things because whatever comes up to the surface, we notice it in EMDR because EMDR is coming from this place of your brain knows what it needs to heal, and we are not directive as the clinician. We are just
letting it do
its thing, and we're following it down all the channels it wants to go on, which can be also really challenging if you have ADHD. Because, which a lot of first responders do, it's challenging because you start to kind of go down things that may or may not really be actually a part of this trauma, but you just can't get your brain to focus in general. So it can be challenging with EMDR, and you really have to be a clinician that knows what you're doing to be able to work with those blocks, because people block in other ways too, where they just don't really want to be that vulnerable, or they're not ready to go there, or there's secondary gain, meaning there's a reason I want to hold on to this trauma, right? That happens a lot with chronic pain. Because, or an illness of some sort, because you've started to, this has become a part of your identity. And so it's really challenging if your identity is really wrapped around this illness or having this trauma, then it's sometimes really hard to let that trauma go. Mm-hmm. And with EMDR, we can get pretty blocked, and that's when we would get directive as the clinician and kind of try to interweave some things cognitively to change that block or get through that block. So EMDR is a fabulous method, obviously. Like, it is evidence-based and it does work. And the most progress that I've had with it really is when clients come in pretty recent to when the incident happened, right? Like, if they come pretty quickly, like within 6 months to a year after something occurring, we can usually move it out pretty quickly within a few six sessions, maybe a little bit less. It just kind of depends on how intense it is, right? But when they come in and it's like, well, I have this whole lengthy history of my childhood trauma, and then I have like military trauma, and I am a firefighter, and I have this trauma too, it's not going to be 6 sessions. It's probably going to be a lot more, and that there's going to be some distress that follows, right? And that would be a person also, when we're talking first responder, then we would want to really plan out the sessions. Like, I don't want you to come in coming off of shift because you're going to be sleep deprived. Yeah. You have to take into consideration what medications are they on? Are they going to cause issues in the processing? You have to take into consideration, depending upon what kind of schedule do they work? You want to have time in between doing the EMDR and them going back to work, right? Because you want them to be stabilized, because being a first responder is a hard job. You're going to go into acute stress on a regular basis, and you're going to get triggered naturally because you have all this trauma swirling around already. So if I'm going to put you in that state, like, you really need to be someone who has really good coping skills, has support, is stabilized, is prioritizing your sleep, like doing the right things already, so that we can get our biggest bang for our buck with EMDR and not be in this situation where you're coming in and the EMDR really destabilized you. So now, instead of doing EMDR this week, I have to stabilize you. And that's how the process of EMDR can get very lengthy if you're doing it when somebody truly isn't ready.
What kind of traumas have you seen in general that this has actually worked with? And you said you try to get the person in as close as to when it happened. Yeah. Is that usually what EMDR is used for?
So you can use it for anything. Yeah. Just to give you a quick answer, you can use EMDR really on anything. It is evidence-based to treat a lot of different things. And in regards to PTSD, you could use single event traumas or complex trauma, childhood trauma. When I've done it, I've on, a recent issue, I think that's really only happened to me a few times in life, where someone has come in and they're like, this just happened to me. It's usually not the case. But I have successfully used it on sexual assault. I've used it with first responders. I've used it on just negative self-esteem, self-worth, childhood trauma.
You could use it for a lot of different things. Phobias. And phobias. I've done it. I would say, like Heidi said, the quicker that you come to do EMDR after something has occurred, probably the better off you're going to be. And with first responders, I have used it with police officers for like officer involved shootings, and it was very effective. Now, I will say that it took a little bit of time, but this was also like less than a year after the incident had occurred. And he hadn't done any trauma reprocessing, and he had been a police officer for like 20 years. So there was a lot of other stuff, but he was able to kind of stay on track and reprocess fairly. I would say it took him about 8 sessions to get the one done.
What factors contributed to that, it taking that long?
Yeah. So scheduling, right? Like he had a busy schedule. So getting into the office frequently enough. And then sometimes, of course, like you have, not only are you coming to counseling because you have maybe some work related stuff, but you also have like a life too, right? You have a marriage, and maybe sometimes that's not going great. You have kids and something's going on with them. And so often, I think too, once you start doing EMDR and you recognize like, oh, I don't feel great sometimes when I leave, there's a block there, and you come in with other things purposefully to be like, I don't want to do EMDR, but I'm not going to tell Laurie I don't want to do EMDR today. So then we end up talking about other things, and then I look at the clock, I'm like, well, I have 30 minutes. What's the point, right? Like we're not going to be able to do this. And so I think there was some of that going on, but just the amount. There's also, I think, when you are coming in to do any sort of trauma reprocessing and there is grief involved, that process can be really lengthy. And I don't want to say that you can't work through it with EMDR or ART, but there is a grief process that you need to go through, right?
Ready.
You have to be ready.
You have to be ready to move on from
You got to be ready
loss.
to move on from that loss. And sometimes like we can remove the trauma aspect of it, right? Like we can remove the traumatic pieces of it, but until you are ready to move on and go through that grief process just in general, it's always going to be a little more lengthy. And I think in this circumstance specifically, there was a ton of grief. So I think that's why it took so long.
I think there's a lot of stall tactics by the.
Oh yeah, totally.
I'm gonna eat up enough this time.
Oh yeah, because
we
they
don't have to
learn. They know the process.
Right. And some of that also might just not even be conscious. It could just be
absolutely.
unconscious.
I don't think
and
that.
I think it also kind of depends on, from a clinician standpoint, like what type of clinician are you, right?
Yeah, I like to be pretty direct.
Well, but also, are you the type of clinician who wants to be direct and have your client sit down and be like, all right, let's get going here. Sit down. Don't tell me how your week is. Let's start with these eye movements. Are you the type of clinician that wants to meet your client where they're at for that day and help them with what they're struggling with that day? EMDR does not work well with that model of let me meet them where they're at today, because this is the treatment plan and we have to stick to it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's similar in other modalities. Like you would do the same thing with prolonged exposure, just like you would if you were doing ERP on OCD. You're not doing talk therapy. We are doing EMDR today, and that's what we're doing. And we're going to do EMDR for the next possibly 8 to 10 sessions or even longer, and we have to stay focused. And that is not how I like to work.
Well, I think we also, as clinicians, like we start to know our clients and their personality, and maybe when they are coming in and trying to get out of doing ART or EMDR or whatever. And so, yes, I always want to meet my clients where they're at, but I can also tell if it's somebody that I've been seeing for a really long time and I'm like, hey, we need to do some ART on this next week because I know that it's impacting you. And if they come in and they're like roundabout way trying to get away from it, I will discuss that. I will ask them, is there a reason you don't want to do this? Is this really what you need to be talking about and using your time for today? And then we can have a conversation about why you don't want to do it.
What are some of the, and again, this is all in general, what are some of the negative effects that people have reported, like nightmares and
headaches sometimes, just like anxiety,
increased emotional states, anxiety. I feel like sleep was probably one of the biggest ones I would hear is like, I can't sleep. I'm not sleeping well. I'm having these crazy dreams. Like I'm waking up frequently, which then when we don't sleep well, like that
just exacerbates
everything to really kind of get chaotic, right? And so I think sleep was one of the biggest ones, and then just the increased emotional distress, and like I'm having these heightened responses to things and reacting to situations with a stronger emotion than what I normally would.
All right, we talked a lot about EMDR, and we're not done with it, but I want to talk about my experience with EMDR. It was after the July 7th attacks. I went to one of the fallen officer, their wake, and there was an image from, because I had heard about injuries, certain injuries that the officer sustained. So we go to the wake, and that was like one of the worst parts because we're there for 4 hours, and we're meeting all the friends and family for several hours because we were the pallbearers. And the only time that I approached the open casket, there was an image that I was trying to. I caught myself because I had heard about the injuries. I was trying to see, but they patched it up, fixed it up because that's what morticians do. And I could not shake it. So then I ended up going to Dottie Claggett, and she did it. And I have to say that walking in, I did not know anything about EMDR, and I wasn't a really big believer in therapy to that point. I am now, so. And I had a hard time focusing on the movement initially. And it did. Once I finally said, okay, something's happening, and it took a minute to first kind of believe in it, but also focus, because, if you listen to me, you probably can see that I can't have a hard time focusing and staying on track. It really brought up a lot of emotions, and what I was like right now, I'm trying to think about that image, and it's almost, I mentally have to work to get back to it. Mm-hmm. But it took several sessions of doing it. Yeah. And I got to say that thinking back on those sessions, which those two have kind of become a little fuzzy to me, it sucked. And I hated it. And I left there, and thank God I didn't go to work afterwards, because it was always at the end of the day. I would either, take a couple hours and leave and go straight over there, or I never went to work afterwards. But it did bring up for me personally, it brought up a lot of weird dreams and very vivid dreams. So that is common.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you say you went in 2017, so just about a year later?
It was about 6 months. It was early 2017.
So I didn't go until 2021 or 22, somewhere around there.
Recent.
But my biggest traumatic incident was 2005.
Okay.
So I let it manifest for 17 years or so. And what I recognize now is that it did manifest as anxiety. And anxiety is a mother.
Oh yeah, it sucks.
I didn't know. I thought my wife was trying to poison me. Like I would make jokes about it.
Yeah,
because I would wake up every night like I had food poisoning. Mm-hmm. Like I felt super nauseous. I would sweat. I'd get cold. I'd end up taking a nap on the bathroom floor and trying to make myself throw up all night. And it was really awkward to me that's how
it came out. Yeah.
Right. And after so many years, this was at least 10 years after that. Yeah. And I really noticed that it was affecting my relationship with my middle child, who is basically my clone. Like, we have the same personality.
They're the best.
It's
the middle child. Yeah. I just want
to hug him so hard.
Put that out there. No, I get it.
He's an amazing kid, and I took a lot of stuff out on him really, really hard because he did remind him of me. So I'm a little bit harder on him than I was on some of the other ones. But that was another thing that I realized. As soon as I went and started talking to Dottie and doing the EMDR, a lot of that just went away. I mean, the anxiety thing was a little bit weird. I'd kind of learned how to cope with it just when I recognized it was just anxiety and I'm not being poisoned regularly. Mm-hmm. I could just basically stop and be like, hey, this isn't real, right? And that was a really weird thing to have to tell yourself is this isn't happening right now. Like, why are we so upset? Why is my heart racing? Why am I breathing so heavy?
Right.
So the breathing exercises helped me out a ton. And just talking with Dottie about different things that you could do, right? Like stop ingesting so much caffeine, right?
What?
Yeah, no.
What a concept.
You can't drink 2,000 milligrams of caffeine a day? What?
A morning, yeah. I mean, you can.
You can, but you're going to be anxious.
Yeah. So
shocker, yeah.
My big thing was friends, food, and hydration, right? You have to drink water. You have to eat better food. And just being around your friends creates those opportunities to talk about different things, So those were the things that really helped me out more than anything. And talking to Dottie, she'd be like, well, so what are you doing? And I'd instantly know, like, well, I'm overdosing on caffeine every day because I don't sleep well because I've overdosed on caffeine the day before. So yeah, that's a stimulant.
Yeah, don't worry. We're going to talk a lot about caffeine.
Oh
yeah.
no, I've got notes on that. I really want to dive into some of that stuff when we get past this stuff. But yeah, that was my experience with EMDR was very similar to Joe's. Though I had a real hard time focusing on what I'm trying to focus on while she's waving and I'm tapping and all the stuff going on. Right? I'm a counter, so I'm busy counting instead of. And I'm like, okay.
You're like, oh, we're at 25. It's
stop
time
counting.
to stop. Yeah.
Stop counting. Stop counting. And I can't stop counting. So it really got awkward. But once I finally realized, okay, let's focus strictly on this and try to do what she's asking us to do, it was almost like things started to get pixelated. Mm-hmm. And the image was still there, but it was getting harder to see.
Yeah.
And then harder to see. And I was like, man, this is really awkward because it was such a vivid memory for so long, 17 years of seeing the same thing and experiencing the same emotions over and over again. And now it's not there, it's 17 years of every day.
It probably feels really good.
It's just, it's almost like you're living a different life at that point.
Yeah.
You don't experience that constantly.
Yes.
And there was a lot of stuff tied into it that I really don't want to get into too much during your episode. I'll talk about that later, but
in his episode,
it's a mind trip that I experienced. So we'll leave it at that. But no, EMDR was fantastic for me, and it absolutely erased the images of what was haunting me.
That's awesome.
Well, this unit in Kent, I mean, he's like the vegan CrossFitter when it comes to EMDR. He will. It's good because people, and that's why we're doing this episode is to educate more and get the word out there. And I think hearing our experience with it too, because it's not like I'm hawking something that I haven't tried myself.
Yeah, for sure.
And real quick on the anxiety is awful because everybody experiences it at certain levels, and some people more than others. But why is it that whenever people worry about something or if it's a change in lifestyle or policy or something changing a kid, they immediately go to the worst case scenario, and any change is always going to be a negative change?
I think our brains are naturally, but we naturally have this like mechanism to keep us safe, right? Like our brain wants to keep us safe and wants to keep us safe right now. It's very selfish. And so a lot of times anxiety is not fear. And a lot of times people misconfuse, like they think that, because I'm anxious about this, it means that I have fear about it, right? But we do have fear structures that everybody's have different fear structures, right? And we can get anxiety from those fear structures. But a lot of times it's our brain's like natural way of going through like all of the what ifs because it wants to keep itself safe, right? So if I can identify what is threatening and what are the worst case scenarios or what could happen, then I have control, right? It's a false sense of control is I can identify what I can control and what I can do so that those bad things don't happen to me.
Well, I'll use these examples as when we first hired on that not every car had a dash cam. Mm-hmm. So everybody at the end of at the end of the detail, people would go and pick up their cars. Well, the cars that did have the dash cams were the last cars that were sitting there. Everybody got the ones without them. Nobody wants to be recorded to have somebody looking over their shoulder. Mm-hmm. And then once they all went to it, and then whenever we got new computers in the car, we had a AVL, the vehicle locator. We thought it was the end of the world. We thought, it was like living in, Russia, in the Soviet Union. It was just,
You're being watched.
We're being watched.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with the body cam. So now you got people that would not want to do this job without a body cam, but the initial response was that it's the end of the world and it's the worst thing ever. Right. And we go through that whenever, you see it within units. If they get a new chief or a major or a lieutenant, shit. It's usually
change
just
is hard. Yeah.
But it's always a negative. It's always goes to the negative thing.
Right. But is it typical for everybody? I know you guys kind of work mostly with first responders. Is it typical for non-first responders to also be so against change? Because I know some people are 1,000%. Like, I love change, but
most people don't like change though, right? Because from a very young age, we're exposed to routine.
Yeah.
You go to school, you
Right.
have the same teacher, you do
Yeah.
the same things at the same time, and you have that routine of life. And we mostly do things in routine, even when somebody's not encouraging us to do it in a routine or telling us we have to do that routine. You get up around the same time, you do the same thing when you get up in the morning, you do the same thing before you go to bed at night, right? We just kind of live in that structure and that routine. And that makes us feel like we have control, and that makes us feel safe and secure. And so when any change occurs in anyone's life, it's distressing. And that's why we have adjustment disorder, right? I'm adjusting to the change that has occurred, whether that be having a child, whether that be an incident that I've gone through, getting married, moving somewhere new, right? Getting a new job, getting a promotion, right? There's all those changes that we go through, and we usually, what happens when we suffer a change is it can induce anxiety or depression because we're acclimating to that change. And it's changing our routine. So we have to take some time to like balance out and calibrate back to this new routine, right? And then once we're in that new routine, it's fine. But it kind of takes you, Laurie and I talk a lot about like your window of tolerance a lot of times. It takes you a little bit out of your window of tolerance sometimes when you suffer a change, because a lot of things might have to happen, right? Like even Laurie's son starting kindergarten and having to drop him off closer to home instead of further down the 380 has ignited
really
this
messed
huge
up my
change,
life.
right? Because now we're sitting in
getting
traffic for
better.
over an hour, and it's like that creates a change, and that change is distressing because I'm used to this one routine, and now that's not my routine anymore. And so I have to acclimate to this, and maybe there's things about it that I don't like. Maybe there are good things about it, but I'm always going to mostly focus on the things that I don't like because it's provoking these feelings that are uncomfortable. Everybody likes to feel joy.
It could lead to magical.
fun.
It could lead to magical thinking, though. You basically create. It could help you create scenarios that there's no evidence that they even exist or will exist.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I also think first responders, just in general, well, I want to talk about our nervous system when we move into ART, but a lot of times what happens is like your nervous system gets mapped, right? And it can anticipate what's to come. And when there is change, that change, it's like almost like your nervous system doesn't want to adjust to it. And then those negative, like, I'm not good enough, I'm hopeless, I'm helpless, especially the I'm not good enough. If you think about it, like if you get a new chief, like you feel like you have to prove yourself, right? And so if they're watching you on a dash cam that you've never had before, do I have to change who I need to be in order to prove that I'm good enough because now they're watching me? Like all of these things are very anxiety provoking. And so I think nobody likes to change, like Heidi said, and all of our clients, whether you're a first responder or not, when things change in their life, it is usually pretty distressing for
Right.
them.
We have to be uncomfortable to make
Yeah,
a change.
absolutely.
Even if you think about like weight loss, right? Like when people want to lose weight,
Oh, yeah.
they're usually at a place where like I'm really uncomfortable. And so now I want to make this change, because change also doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, right? Like just like EMDR, it takes time. Like you can't just do one EMDR session and like, boom, I'm healed. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And what we're really kind of talking about is also like in the area of like mindfulness, right? And like noticing our feelings and noticing our behaviors from this non-judgmental space. We don't do that naturally. We live in a very like critical, mindless world where we aren't doing one thing at a time. We're doing several things at once, and we're trying to multitask all the time. And we have this like false sense of control. So when things feel out of control, we have a really hard time grasping like, how can I gain control back into my life, right? And the reality is that we actually have to move more towards like radical acceptance, that I don't have control over everything. I have some control, and I can focus on the things I choose to have control over. But the things that I don't have control over, I can sit here and think about them all day long, but it's not going to change if I have control over them. It's not how it works. So mindfulness is like is a very helpful tool for combating anxiety, right?
Yes.
And other things like depression. And mindfulness has been around for ages, right? And we just don't live in a culture that's very mindful. And you can learn mindfulness if you're brought up in a household that is mindful and that you experience that, but you can also teach yourself how to be mindful, how to be here and now, and noticing what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what my behaviors are from a non-judgmental space. So I'm not attaching something negative to it or something positive to it. I'm just noticing it. I'm just observing that I have this feeling or this sensation in my chest. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just know that I feel it.
People are mindful of the amounts of likes and shares there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their shit
yeah.
gets, yeah.
Yeah. I also think a lot of times people are so uncomfortable, but you get comfortable in uncomfortability and you don't want to change because that's even more uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
It's familiar.
It's very familiar. And so you're just willing to stay there for longer.
I think you grow doing this. I mean, and it's hard to do, but growing, and you have to do uncomfortable crap to grow. I mean,
Absolutely.
Starting the show, I mean, we're talking. You go back and listen to the early episodes. I feel that I've gotten better as an interviewer and a conversationalist, and this has actually helped me talking to officers when they come in here with problems. Mm-hmm. Because when I was out in the streets, I did one thing for a long time, and I was used to that. This is different.
Yep.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
I want to talk about ART, Accelerated Resolution Therapy.
Yes, let's do it.
Laurie, you're up.
I'm up. Okay. So I want to touch on ART, or your nervous system, because when you were talking about anxiety, I think it's really important to mention your nervous system and what happens for first responders and how we get stuck in what we a lot of times think is anxiety, but is nervous system malfunction almost. And so, Heidi already mentioned, not only does your brain like see all of this, but your body feels it as well, right? And so because it's a huge part of the ART process, I feel like it's kind of important to mention. So you all know, like, your amygdala fires, your prefrontal cortex shuts down, your hippocampus doesn't file the memories, but we also have to think about what is happening in your body, because your body does store a ton of the trauma within it as well. And if you haven't read The Body Keeps the Score, it's a fantastic book. It's quite thick, so maybe listen to it, but it is incredibly, I think, impactful when you're thinking about trauma and what ART really does for your brain and your body. So that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, all first responders are in fight mode. Nobody's like, hey, I just don't want to run towards it, so I'm gonna hijack it out of here, right? Like, everybody's going towards it. Doesn't matter if you are a PD fire, doesn't matter. So, over time, that fight or flight, that sympathetic response, you think about the lever, right? The off and on. And oftentimes after you start, your nervous system's mapped, right? So from the moment you're born until you leave the earth, like Heidi said, we can anticipate what's to come, right? Like, when you're on shift, your nervous system knows what to expect and when it needs to kick on and when it needs to try to shut off, right? And so we give this example of, if you are fire or PD, it doesn't matter. Usually the day before you're about to get onto shift. And for PD, it's a little different because you typically work multiple days in a row, whereas fire, you have either a 48-96 or 24-48. There's like a shift that happens in your nervous system. And you guys probably could tell me a little bit, like, did you ever notice, like, okay, let's say you worked a couple days in a row and then you had a few days off. How did you feel the day before? Like, did you notice a shift in your mindset before you went to work?
Back then, we were just so amped to go to work, it didn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you could, and shift changes in shift that happens a lot, especially whenever we spend 9 months in the academy. Of course, I was 22 at the time.
Yeah.
9 months in the academy, working days and weekends off, and then my first shift was deep nights.
Yeah.
And then and it's.
So that was at the beginning of your career,
that was the
right?
beginning of career.
You were
but
amped.
Once, yes, it was very amped, and I was kind of running off that. But that was before, that was before energy drinks, though. So,
Yeah.
and I didn't drink coffee.
So after 10-ish years, how did you feel, whether you had energy drinks or not? Did you want to go to work the next day?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You did?
I did.
Did you want to go to work?
It ebbs and flows, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
I've noticed right about 7 years, a lot of guys really start not
Yeah.
wanting to come to work.
Totally.
And you can probably see it in their performance evaluations and their time cards that
Right.
they take more time off.
Which is, I think, really true. So we will tell you our magic number of years that we think that this happens. But yeah, like, over time of the exposure to the trauma, the vicarious trauma that you guys experience as first responders, meaning it's not happening to you specifically, you're showing up to a very emotional situation and you're absorbing a lot of emotions, and it's traumatic sometimes, right? So what happens over time is your nervous system maps itself and it recognizes, like, hey, we're going to be on for this amount of time. And our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, gets stuck in the on position because we start to learn things about the world that maybe we didn't think prior to. And a lot of times, and people, right? So like, what that typically looks like is like, everybody is stupid. People are ungrateful.
People are dangerous.
People are dangerous. The world is unsafe.
Cynicism sets in.
Yeah, absolutely. You get jaded. And then you couple in the not sleeping aspect of things, where we're going to talk about sleep a little bit later, but when you get at night, to get your deepest stages of sleep, you have to be in your parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. And a lot of times first responders don't get into that because of caffeine, all these different factors, right? So then you get this lever. So if you think about the lever being on, there might be moments where you're like hovering below the on position and you might feel like, oh, I'm resting, but you're really not, right? Because then like it's go time and you know how to go. And over time, because everybody's stupid, the world is unsafe, I hate people, you feel like you have to be in your sympathetic nervous system, which you get hypervigilant, right? I'm not going to go into a restaurant and sit with my back to the door because I don't know what's going to happen. This is a concert. I'm not going there. I don't want to be around people because they're unsafe, right? So you start to like live your life this way. And a lot of times what happens is that that becomes your normal, and you don't even know that it's your normal because you just get stuck in it, right? So again, you don't even recognize how uncomfortable you are until maybe a really critical thing happens or someone points out to you or it goes to your home life, hey, the way that you're treating our children is not okay. The way you're treating me is not okay. And then you're like, is it? I don't know. Maybe I need to talk to somebody.
And it's usually a very gradual,
Absolutely.
moment in your life, and I immediately, before you said it, I immediately thought about it affecting home life.
Yeah.
Who sees that the most? Whenever he never wants to do anything, so stay home. We don't want to. You don't take me anywhere.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So
the world becomes unsafe.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And people, and I think like it's different for fire than it is for PD. I think like specifically for PD, I don't think the sympathetic ever turns off. Because
absolutely not.
Especially for PD, you start to get jaded in the way that like the world is dangerous and it's unpredictable and it's uncertain and it's unsafe, and I have to always be ready.
Yes.
I have to be
even
prepared,
when I'm not on shift.
Even when I'm not on shift.
So what effect does that have on your neurosystem?
So, well, okay. So if your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system is designed to save your life, right? Like it's fight or flight. Like that turns on when there's a threat, when your amygdala fires. Like again, Heidi told you all, like we prioritize in the moment survival over long term. Like we care about the long term, but we need to do what's necessary right now. So again, your nervous system gets mapped and it's like, hey, we got to stay on all the time because this is how I keep myself alive, essentially, because I've learned all these things about the world being unsafe and I don't want to go there, right? So what's unfortunate is that we have this autonomic nervous system, right, that is in the background and it's automatic. It runs all the time, and it's where your five senses lie. All right, here I go. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. I did it. Sometimes I say two of them twice I don't know. So, but either way, when that's running in the background, doesn't matter if you are in your parasympathetic nervous system or your sympathetic, it's absorbing all of the trauma through your five senses. So when you're going on these traumatic calls, a lot of times like things that you smell, things that you see, things that you touch or hear, it's storing within your nervous system. And so Heidi and I like to call it the trauma zombie, right? Like it gets in your system and it just like takes over. And so what that looks like is I have a lot of unexplained body pain or things going on within my body, and I don't know what it is. And I think that I have cancer, but someone is poisoning me. And I have literally gone to every doctor. They've done MRIs, CTs, every blood work you can imagine, and literally nothing is wrong with me. But I feel within my body, and we're not saying it's not anxiety because there's a lot of anxiety that comes with it, but a lot of times it is unprocessed trauma that is stored in your nervous system. And so we're going to talk about how with ART, the goal is to get a lot of that out of there, but over time, it starts to become a constant battle within your body to remain in control and to fight off all of the uncomfortable symptoms that you're experiencing within your nervous system. And ultimately, if you never ever seek help or recognize that it's there, the thing that's designed to keep you alive will ultimately kill you because you have to come out of it. And
Because
so
when you're in that sympathetic place, like your heart rate is increased.
Yes,
your
your
blood
blood- why do you
pressure
think
is
there's so many
increased,
heart
right?
attacks?
Like, everything goes up
Yes.
to survive in this moment. But if we don't ever turn that off, then
You can't live
we're
like
gonna
that.
get high blood pressure. We're gonna have
and
the higher risk
cardiovascular
for-
issues are huge,
Yeah.
are like a huge killer.
It's the number one killer
Yeah.
than suicide and then the actual job
Yes.
in the police
Yes.
profession.
Well, and that affects your adrenal system too, correct?
Yes.
all of
Yeah.
your hormones, all of them, your cortisol, your testosterone, everything. And so again, coupled with lack of sleep, it's a really nasty cycle, and unprocessed trauma, really nasty cycle, right? So this is kind of a good segue into ART. And so ART stands for Accelerated Resolution Therapy. So I think it's really important to think about, when we're talking about EMDR, the D stands for desensitization. The R in ART stands for resolution. So that's a really, really important thing to think about. So it's kind of similar. It's the person who created ART, Lainey Rosenzweig, she was doing EMDR, and she was like, hey, I'm seeing these clients and I'm doing this thing, but it's like not working the way that I want it to work. It's not working as fast as I want it
She's
to
like,
work.
I could do better.
I could do better, right? So she created this like protocol, and then she went to Francine Shapiro, and Francine was like, hey, you're not doing EMDR. So you either need to do EMDR or do what you are doing and call it something else. And she did that, and she called it accelerated resolution therapy. Some people call it ART. Some people call it ART. I like to call it ART because sometimes when you're like art therapy, people think, oh, are we going to be coloring pictures? Not today, friends. So
I've had other officers ask.
Yes.
Yeah, say that.
yeah. So it's similar in that we're using that bilateral stimulation, the eye movements that, stimulate the left and the right side of your brain, your logic and your emotion to reprocess your trauma. And what we are essentially looking at and how it is a little bit different is that I want y'all to think about when you experience anything in life, you see it in images, right? It's like a story, good and bad. It doesn't matter. The day that your kids were born, bringing your therapy dog to work the first day, it's like a story, and it's real fast and it reels through your mind and you can see the images. Well, it's the same thing goes for traumatic things as well. It's like there's a set of images, and what happens is when we see, smell, all the senses, taste, and we see the traumatic image, what happens is there's usually a physical response in our body. And that doesn't always feel good, right? And we talk about a lot of times people will go, you've been a police officer for 20 years and you go and you run a call and you smell something that maybe you've smelled before, and maybe what you are doing in this current moment is not traumatic. You are literally pulling somebody over for speeding, and there's like this physical response and you're like, whew, where'd that come from? I don't like that. That didn't feel good. Or you're at the grocery store and you see a kid wearing a white shirt, and that is like a no-no, right? And it triggers within your nervous system. So ART really focuses on erasing and replacing images that are stuck and removing the trauma from your body. And we are going and we're finding a resolution to what we experienced, that traumatic event. We would like to resolve it, and we'll tell you kind of a little bit about how that works. What we essentially are trying to do is keep the knowledge and lose the pain. So we can't get rid of the facts of a situation because, like Heidi said, like we need the information, right? Like your hippocampus has to file it away because we want to come back to it at some point for just, I don't know, training purposes, knowledge, whatever. It doesn't matter. You want to be able to access the memory, but you don't have to access the trauma and the pain associated with the memory. So ultimately, you will never lose any facts of a situation. You will just lose the heightened emotional response, and you can change what it looks like in your mind. So a lot of times, like people will come in, and because they have that nervous system response, their body is so tight. They come in and they're like, I'm like, how are you? And they're like, I'm doing so good. And their shoulders are like past their ears, or they're like sweating profusely. And I'm like,
Gritting her teeth.
yeah, I'm like, you don't look like you're okay. But we leave feeling very relaxed. So I'll tell you a little bit about the process itself, but it is the reason that Heidi and I love ART is because of how quickly it can work. So it is rapid. So one single trauma, you can reprocess that in 60 minutes, which is one counseling session. Now, we're not saying you come in for ART and you do it one time and you're going to be cured, right? But we are saying that we should be able to work on this trauma this one time, and you should never have to come back to it ever again.
Why is that?
Because of how we are, first of all, the way that we are exposing you to it. So in EMDR, that's free association. So we're letting your brain do its own thing, right? Well, in ART, no, I'm saying you sit down and this is what I want you to do and you're going to do it, right? Which I know that sounds like kind of hasty, but we're going directly to the trauma.
That image. So, we're not asking you, did it start earlier? If you say, I want to work on this specific
that is what we are.
It's like surgical. It's surgically going to that particular.
Yes. So if you came in and you said, hey, I just ran this call the other day, we'll just use what you did EMDR on, right? And you're like, I want to work on this. We are going to work on that. We're not going to be like, well, when's the first time that you ever felt not good enough or hopeless related to that, right? We're not working with cognitions. We're working with images and body sensations. So it's very direct and it's very helpful to be direct because we want your brain to look at it. And it is exposure. We're going to expose you to it and we're going to look at it multiple times. But every time you look at it, it's going to be better. The first time will be the worst time. And then every time after that, it will get better, right? And when we are doing it, we are really focusing on looking at the scene like it happened with all of the images, all of the feelings, everything associated with it. And we're going to go back and forth and allow you to remove some of it from your body. So we'll take breaks, right? We're going to focus on the scene and then we're going to focus on your body. And essentially what that's doing is removing, like we're watching it. So we're exposing you to it, but then we're also removing all of those things, the trauma zombie. We're getting rid of the trauma zombie.
We're getting rid of the negative sensations,
yes.
right? So we're focusing, we're removing that association between this image and this negative sensation and where it's stored in my body, right? Yeah. So we can basically like undo that channel that's been created, that connection.
Like you see the image and the body sensation happens, right? Or the feeling is very overwhelming. And so like Heidi said, ultimately what we're trying to do is like, they're paired in your mind right now and we're trying to unpair them, if that makes sense. So we go through this process as many times as we need to. Sometimes it takes people a little bit of time to get through it the first time because it's very emotional and it's,
I would say usually like in ART, the first 20-ish minutes are the worst.
Yes. I would say though, I'll say this. The first time that anybody ever does ART, I think it is the longest time. And then every time after that, just with the EMDR, I feel like this happens too. Your brain becomes accustomed to the process and you learn that the first 20 minutes are going to be really bad, but I know what's to come next. So I'm okay getting super vulnerable and just going right into it. And for my people that come in and they have done a lot of ART, over time they become like
their brain
super
your
fast.
Brain knows the process because there's a set amount of protocol, so it's the same protocol because it's not free association.
So with EMDR it's different, right? Because it's different every time. Your brain might go to a different space every time you do it, and I'm sure y'all experienced that. Like there might be a time where you're like, what? Where am I going with this? And why did that pop up? But then you got to go down that rabbit hole, right? So with ART, every time you do it, it is the same direct. You're never changing the way that you do it with the trauma reprocessing protocol. So we look at it a couple of times, right? And then we have an opportunity to change it. And your brain is very powerful. Again, we cannot get rid of facts, but we can change images in our mind. And oftentimes we will tell clients, I want you to change it to what you wish would have happened or something that looks more positive in your mind. And a lot of times this is where people start to struggle because they're like, especially police officers, because they're like, this is fair. I'm a very logical person and that's not how it happened. I'm like, okay, well, remove the trauma from it. How do you wish it would have happened? Or why does it have to be that way in your mind? But you get to go back sometimes and like help the earlier version of you, that hopelessness, that helplessness that you experienced. You can go back and help your earlier self. And that's a really powerful moment for most people, right? They're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I got to go do this. Or in that moment, I felt a lot of, I was very helpless because I thought I did something wrong and I was able to correct that for myself.
We make suggestions as the clinician and we use a lot of like metaphors and, we use a lot of like imaginary tools, which is kind of weird, but we've put your brain in this space where it has the capacity to be very creative, right? And so we want to capitalize on that and we want it to be as creative as possible. And so sometimes that may look like you go back and you save that person because that's what's going to resolve this for you. And even though factually that's not what happened, and sometimes I have first responders save people, and sometimes they are like, no, I have to let this one go.
Yeah.
Like, I can't save this one. I need to let it go. But there are other areas that I can change, like what happened after. And I can remove the negative images that really get me stuck. Like the image that comes to my mind frequently, we can erase that and we can replace a positive image. So that isn't, that's not causing the flashbacks. It's not causing your amygdala
body to respond. And so after we are able to change it, then we are able to erase it, like Heidi said, erase and replace the image, because sometimes images get stuck, right? And ultimately what y'all are saying when you did EMDR is like, it looks very fuzzy. Well, that's great. That should happen. But we can go a step further and we can say we can remove it completely.
You can erase it.
You can erase it. And we ask you to put something over it, essentially, right? And sometimes it can be related and sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'm like, pick a unicorn. I don't care what makes you happy, right? And so people come up with things, and a lot of times I have clients that use the same images because they come up with, hey, you know what, I love fishing, so I'm going to put the image of my son and I fishing because that brings me a lot of joy, and that's a really great thing for me to look at. Super. So as we go through this process, we get to erase and replace and move all of the sensations that are connected to those triggering images in your mind and body. All of that goes. So those people who come in with their shoulders past their ears or like sweating profusely usually leave and they're like, oh,
very relaxed.
Very relaxed, because ultimately what we're doing is we are calming the amygdala down, right? The amygdala is on fire. We're calming it down.
And desensitizing,
it to those images. And we're accessing, you know, I said, y'all live in your sympathetic nervous system. So we're accessing the vagus nerve, which runs down your entire body. And when it's triggered, or when you're able to connect with your vagus nerve, you are instantly put into your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's what you have to be in order to rest and digest, in order for your memories to be filed away appropriately. So then what happens is, a lot of times we are looking at things very like the trauma very emotionally. And so that bilateral stimulation, because I hear clients say all the time, like, logically, I know A, B, and C, but this is how I feel about it. And I'm stuck there, right? So we get to, with EMDR too, because you're using the same bilateral stimulation, access both areas of your brain. The logic needs to be there too, as well as the emotion, so that you can think and feel about it differently than you did before. And you can make rational decisions because your prefrontal cortex is online. And then you can file the memory away appropriately in the drawer that it needs to go in, instead of having like your files all over the place, because that's not going to help you, right? So then it files the memory away appropriately in the right drawer, and you can access the facts of the situation, but you will feel differently about it and it will not look the same in your mind.
Right. So anytime you try to think about that image, it could still be there. Some people, it will be there, but it's fuzzy. But a lot of times, since they replaced that image, their brain immediately reroutes to the new image.
Yes.
And so, like, for example, to get trained in ART, you have to do ART.
Yes.
And so I did ART. My dog actually like passed away in front of me at home. And so it was a graphic image, and I was like, I have to get rid of this graphic image. And so I erased it and I replaced it with an image that used to be the background on my phone of her, like, she was a big dog, like 90 pounds, like laying on top of me, and we were snuggling. And so I erased it and replaced it with that image. And so now, like, and this was 4 years ago that I did it. And when I try to think of that image, it's not there. I cannot see it. And I immediately go to the image of, like, that's what pops into my mind, is that image of her and I snuggling. It's just the picture that comes to mind, because we think in images. We don't think in words. Like, you don't, if you think about like an apple, you don't see the word apple. You see an image of an apple, or maybe an apple tree, right? And whatever is meaningful to you, right? And so we are wanting to get rid of those images, because that's what trips us up, right? Those images that we store from that experience, coupled with the association that it has with where the trauma is being stored in our bodies. We want to move that trauma out with the eye movements, and we want to do voluntary image replacement, meaning I'm going to give you a suggestion of what you could put in that place, but we're going to erase it first, and then I'm going to ask you to put a different image there, and you get to decide what that image is. I'll make suggestions, but your brain's going to do what it knows that it needs to do, or what's meaningful to you.
Yeah. And then it's really awesome, because at the end of this process, we ask you to, like, go across and see yourself outside on the other side of this, right? Like, what does it look like now that you're on the other side of your future, like leaving this, like you've left it in the past. And this is like where I feel like most people have such big, powerful moments because they get to see their future feeling better and not like, I have to carry this around with me all the time. And it is incredibly impactful for clients because a lot of times you've been carrying this around for 17, 20, 30 years, and you don't have to do that anymore. And they feel so relaxed because for the first time in maybe 10 years, their parasympathetic nervous system was accessed and they can relax, right? And so Heidi and I do this with all of my first responders. And I got trained in EMDR in 2016, and Heidi and I both got trained in ART in 2020, and I will use EMDR tactics and I will use EMDR on somebody that maybe has like a ton of childhood trauma, but this is like my go-to.
But I'm going to do ART first.
But I'm going to absolutely do ART first, and then I feel like if I'm stuck, I might go to it. But I think what we see is this is not as painful for our clients, and that is what I love about it, because ultimately, like, I care about every single one of my clients. Like, they are kind of like my family members. And when things impact them, it absolutely impacts me, right? And so I don't ever want them to feel like I can't go on shift. I can't go home to my family. And because I'm feeling so raw and emotional, like I'm continuing to suffer, and I don't want to go back, because that does happen a lot of times for people when they start doing EMDR, is they don't want to go and do it anymore because it's painful for them. So this has been such a great alternative for us to be able to reprocess something pretty quickly. And then nobody's like really afraid of it after they do it the first time. They're like, that's like, they say it's witchcraft. Yeah. Most of our clients, it's not, they're science, right? But they'll be like, that was fucking witchcraft. And I'm like, it really wasn't. But if you feel that way and you want to feel that way, that's totally fine. But this is definitely like our go-to. And the other kind of cool thing about it is I think that a lot of times first responders don't want to tell anybody the graphics, the things, right? Because they don't want to traumatize anybody else. Well, I really appreciate that, but also, like, I can handle it, right? And I can cope with it, and I have ways of doing that. But if you do not want to talk about it, you do not have to talk about it at all.
You don't have to say at all what you're processing.
You don't even have to tell me what it is that you're working on. I mean, I always encourage my clients to, because I think it creates vulnerability and trust and all of that. But you absolutely do not have to tell your ART therapist about what you are working on if you do not want to.
And this could it work with grief?
Yes, it can. So I will say this, again, same thing with EMDR. You have to be ready, and it has to be a process. But if the grief is traumatic, if there was something traumatic about it, then we can help you remove the trauma associated with it. But again, we have to continue.
You're still going to have to go through the grief.
Work on the grief and the grief process outside of ART.
What about childhood trauma?
Yes.
And that's okay. You do a lot of that.
You can do a lot of different stuff with childhood trauma, depending upon what it is. You can go to like the worst of the childhood trauma. You could have the clients work on just a couple of different images that come up from their childhood. So there's like kind of different ways you can work within that. And then there's a couple different protocols and advanced trainings you can do within ART to get different scripts. But everything is a script that we use. So every time you do the basic protocol, it's going to be the same exact script. I'm going to say the same things to you. You're going to know what to expect, which I also think is very helpful for clients, because a lot of the times, once again, it's fear of the unknown. It's the anxiety of the uncertainty. And I think EMDR, every session is going to be different, right? And so that can provoke a lot of anxiety, because I don't know what I'm going to get into today, and I don't know that I'm in a space to do that. Whereas ART, every time you're going to come in, and it may feel different because you have a different association to that trauma. But that at the end of that session, how you're going to feel. You're going to feel better because we resolved that trauma for you. So clients leave feeling better than they did coming into it. Yes. And I have done this countless times. Yes. I mean, I wish I could have kept track on how many times I've done ART, but I recently had a client come in that was like, we knew we were going to work on one of their biggest traumatic incidents from their career. And when I when he came in, he was like already crying in the lobby. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, come back with me. We got back there. I was like, we're not even going to talk. Let's just get into it, because I knew why he was crying. And we got into it, and halfway through, because I said, the first half of ART is really challenging. He was very distressed. And because it was a very critical call. And but after we got through the hardest part of it, he like stopped and he was like, this is the most amazing thing that I have ever experienced in my life. Like, to be able to let go of this call that has been haunting me for 20 plus years. Like, you are God sent. And I'm like, well, I didn't create this, but thank you. And he was like, no, but like you're connected to me in this moment, and the way that you're doing this with me, like, you have to be anointed to do this process. Yeah. And he was like, I didn't think that I could ever let this go, or that this wouldn't follow me around. And we weren't even done with the protocol. We were just in the middle of it.
Wait, there's more.
Yeah. Like, wait. And he had done ART before. And so he knew the process, but he was like, all we had done at that point was rid his body of the sensations that he had been carrying around. And we had seen the image, and gone back to it and removed those sensations. And it's just, I feel really honorable to be able to be doing this type of work with clients, to see that change and see how they can like move forward in their lives. Because I have a lot of clients that come to me, first responders that come to me, and they're like, I feel hopeless. I feel helpless. And like, this is my last, I don't know what else to do. I have started to, I'm not thinking about committing suicide or doing anything to myself, but I could see if I don't do something now, years down the road, that's going to become an option for me, because I can't keep carrying all of these calls and all of this trauma around, right? Because you're experiencing, as a first responder, you're experiencing up to 300 traumatic events in a career. That's a lot of trauma, right? And it's highly emotional. So you're holding and storing in all of that trauma. And sometimes when I do ART, it's the calls that they're like, well, I don't really know that I need to process that, but I guess we'll do it. That's the one that's really deeply rooted and causing a lot of distress, but it's not always the one that flashes in your mind. Sometimes it's the ones you have buried so deep as a way to survive that is the one that gets you whenever it comes to your mind. And when we do ART, because we've kind of put your brain in this space where we're not cognitive, a lot of times different images or memories start to come up that you haven't thought about. Yes. And if clients don't know what they want to work on, we can metaphorically go to the filing cabinet or the mailbox and ask your brain, where do you want to go? And it will tell you. It will give you an image. It will give you a sensation. It will give you something to work on, and we'll go with it.
Yeah. And I have clients that I was doing EMDR on, and then once I got trained, I was like, well, I'm going to do ART on them and see how they feel. And they're like, okay, well, I don't know what that was, but I don't ever want to do EMDR again. I'm like, okay, cool. Then we won't. Right. And so it's really, really a very life-changing technique that EMDR is fantastic. And I love EMDR, but I think specifically for first responders, this is so helpful, just to be able to come in and work on something and get it done quickly. Because again, like, you guys are problem solvers, right? Like, we established that, and you like to get things done. And a lot of times when first responders are coming to us, they have like shit's out of control, right? Because their wife said, I'm going to get a divorce, or you got to change something, or I'm done, or you're going to lose your job, or you're going to quit your job, or you're never sleeping. And so, like Heidi said, it's such a cool thing to see people recover from that a little bit quicker, and to be able to say, hey, I actually do want to go to work today, and I do want to go home and be with my family. And I just, or be able to genuinely just, like, feel better.
Once again, be in the moment, be mindful,
yes,
and not
perceive everything as a threat
all the time, right?
Yes.
And so, and after Alan happened, I had several first responders that came within that first week of Alan happening. And
you're speaking of that incident, the Alan,
the shooting in
Alan. Yeah, because we have a lot of listeners that don't. Alan, Alan's a city just north of Dallas, and there's a large outdoor mall, and there was an active shooter. And he had shot several people and
just shopping.
kids.
Yeah.
And man, one officer, and there's videos of his body cam.
Yeah.
He ran over there and he ended the threat. And but yeah, that
It was highly traumatic.
Yeah, it's
and
highly traumatic.
I got several first responders that were on scene pretty quickly after it started, and I did ART with them within 1 week of it happening, and I was just like, okay, sit down. I know we just met. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions first before we get started, because I have to do a little bit of an assessment first, but sit down. And I was just like, I have to move this out of them now. Like, I'm not going to wait another week. We're going to move it now. And we got through it, and they felt better, and I've seen them since for check-ins or here and there, and we don't need to go back to it.
Well, and on the
with
flip
it.
side of that, I had some people from the same incident wait and come in 6 months later, and it was much, I mean, obviously we got through it with ART, but I will say it was much harder, I think, on them because it was in there for much longer.
Right. Well,
So,
and it started to manifest, right?
it's
Like
the trauma zombie.
the trauma zombie is manifesting, right? And so, but we can still move it out in one session with
absolutely.
ART. And if we're working on not necessarily like a single event trauma or like a specific thing, like maybe we're working on like, I don't like my lieutenant, or my wife and I aren't getting along, and we've had like these lots of arguments, and I have a lot of resentment. If we're working on something that's like more obscure like that and not a direct like this exact event, we can work on like the worst of it or the first time it happened, but we also can just work on that through a metaphorical way of like, this is a constant problem and I have to learn to adjust and adapt to this problem, but I don't want to have the distress that it's causing me. We can even do ART on things like that.
We can do ART on addiction, fear of change, anxiety, phobias, lots and lots of different
Just
things.
a typical day of dealing with anxiety or depression. There's
tons of
so
things.
many things you can use it on.
how accessible is ART?
So it's
accessible.
pretty accessible. The number of clinicians is growing like very, very rapidly because every time they hold the training, they're full. So you know that people are wanting to do it. So there is a website that you can go to, which is acceleratedresolutiontherapy.com. And there is a list of providers
For your state or for your zip code.
So you should be able to find them there. I will say it's not a click option on Psychology Today. So if you're looking on Psychology Today, with frequently people do, there is no option to search for an ART therapist. Sometimes it's listed in their bio. If you're searching like trauma or EMDR, it might be listed there, but it's not an option. We're
If
trying
you're in
to.
DFW, there's a plethora.
Oh,
of
yes. If you're in
ART
DFW,
clinicians.
there's a lot of them.
Wow, I think the listener just got a really good definition of the protocol of ART, and from my position in this office, I'm really going to push people that come in here to try it.
Yeah.
We do EMDR all the time, but I did not know enough about ART, and I know that Barbara's been doing it for a while, so she has talked about it, but she's really one of the only people that we've had on to talk about it, especially nobody has talked about it, this kind of definition. So there are some other things I want to bring up with y'all that are major contributors to decline in physical and mental health and first responders and sleep. Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
We love to talk about sleep.
So I think it's important to mention that the top 3 killers of first responders is cardiac events, cancer, and suicide. And so Heidi and I are very passionate about sleep and very passionate about getting y'all to understand why sleep is important and why those are the top 3 killers of first responders. And so we can talk a little bit about like the stages of sleep, how they're important.
So when we talk about sleep, a lot of times I like to just give a quick rundown of how our sleep kind of functions so that it can be helpful in discussing this further. So we have 90-minute sleep cycles, and we vacillate through stages 1 through 4 in REM every 90 minutes. And stages 1, 2, and 3 are really not that important, actually. They're kind of like the stages of sleep where you're just starting to fall asleep and initiate sleep, and you're just kind of getting into it, right? You're easily awoken in these stages, and it's usually about the first 30-ish minutes of your 90-minute sleep cycle is when you're in stages 1, 2, and 3. Then we vacillate into stage 4, which is your deepest stage of sleep. This is where your body gets full rejuvenation, right? We can cleanse the plaque from our arteries. Our cardiovascular system basically flushes the blood through and it cleanses it. We make natural killer cells, which help us fight off immune system dysfunction and cancer. We produce our sex hormones in this area, and we also produce like our hunger cues and our satisfaction cue hormones in this area. So it's really, stage 4 is really the biggest bang for your buck on your body, right?
But how much people usually get in that realm? Because I don't know that I get into that much.
You technically always get into it, right? Like you're always going to go through all of the stages, and stage 4 is usually around your 45-minute mark of your 90-minute cycle. And so like if you've ever woken up in stage 4, you feel like you're going to die. Like you feel so tired and you don't even know where you're at or what's going on. That's because you're in stage 4. And then you vacillate into REM after the stage 4, and that's overnight therapy. That's when our eyes move back and forth. We're able to process our memories, process our feelings. And it's like the only time of day that our brain is offline. And we flush the spinal fluid throughout our brain and the networks that it has so we can remove the plaque buildup so it can help prevent dementia later on in life. And so REM is needed for survival. We have to have REM to live. And so when we have a lack of REM, our body, we can't make up sleep ever. Once it's lost, it's lost. But if we don't have REM, then the next night or the next time we go to sleep, our brain is like, okay, well, we're going to prioritize REM because we've missed out on it. And I can't miss out on REM because I have to live. So where a lot of the breakdown comes in, it's a little bit different for fire than it is for PD, but just in a general sense, with your sleep. So if you think about sleeping, nobody does this, but let's just say we think about sleeping from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., right? So if you go to bed at 10, that first half of your night is really in each 90-minute cycle. Stage 4 is going to get longer and longer each 90 minutes in that first half of your night. So like from 10 to 1, you're getting the bulk of your stage 4 sleep. And then from 1 to 6, you're getting the bulk of your REM sleep. So you're still vacillating through all of the stages of sleep every 90 minutes, but REM gets longer and longer in the first half of the day or in the morning hours, right? Early morning hours. And so where this becomes an impact for fire specifically is that they're getting woken up, right? They're running calls in the middle of the night and they're sleeping and they're getting woken up and then they're coming back to the station. They may have a hard time falling back to sleep or they just might get back too late. A lot of my clients tell me like, if I get back at 4:30, I'm just not even going to bother going to sleep because I have to get up anyways. So what's the point?
Start drinking coffee.
Yeah, I'm going to start drinking my coffee, right? So they don't go back to sleep. And so now we've missed out on 60% of our REM because you got disrupted. And so now we have to make that REM up. And so not make it up, but we have to get it because we have to live. And so when they go to sleep that night, now instead of getting the bulk of my stage 4 at the first half of my night, it's being disrupted by REM. So I'm not getting as much stage 4. And so this is where we see a lot of low testosterone, sleep apnea, cardiovascular issues, right? And then also with the cancer side of things, fire obviously is exposed to a lot of carcinogens already. But when we sleep less than 6 hours a night,
which is sleep deprivation.
So one night of sleeping less than 6 hours, you lose 70% of your natural killer cells that fight off cancer.
Which is like a shocking
number.
So
big, right? And to replenish that 70% loss, you have to sleep every night for 3 to 4 weeks. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours is what replenishes that one night of 70% loss. So everybody's
like,
right?
oh my God,
Whenever
I'm going to die
people
tomorrow.
This, they laugh because they're like, oh, I'm going to die like literally today, right? No, not necessarily. But like that is what is scientifically actually happening, right? Yeah. And then on the PD side of things, we have what I notice the most in clients is like, okay, working overnight is a whole other issue, right? Beast. Because now I'm having to flip my circadian rhythm and I'm having to teach myself that like during the day is nighttime. And so I'm having to mimic that melatonin production to be able to initiate sleep, right? I have that issue, but coupled with the fact that I'm making myself stay awake all night long, which is really challenging and not natural. We're just not naturally driven to be awake all night long, right? We can trick our bodies into it and we can do it. It's that coupled with high caffeine use, which is across the board for fire and PD, but I think specifically for PD, it is because I'm making myself stay awake, right? And then when you're working during the day, because it is a 12-hour shift, which we don't have control over for the most part, unless you're like an admin, it might be different, but most of the time it's 12 hours, right? There's not enough time in the day. There's not enough time in the day to get 8 hours of sleep, right? Like I have to report in at 6 a.m. or 5 or usually 5 or 6, right? So I'm having to get up early. I don't live close to the PD, so I have to drive there. So I'm really like, I can't go to bed at 7 p.m. because I'm just getting home. So there's not enough time in the day
to schedule
for me
8 hours
to get enough sleep, right? Coupled with the caffeine. So where caffeine? So caffeine is a stimulant, and the major issue that we have with caffeine is when we drink caffeine, what it does to our bodies is it blocks the receptor in our brain called adenosine. Adenosine is our sleepy pressure chemical. So when we wake up in the morning, we start producing adenosine over the course of our day. And so when we sleep, whether that be at night or during the day, like we produce that melatonin in the early morning hours, as long as we're not exposed, early evening hours, as long as we're not exposed to too much blue light, we produce that melatonin. And melatonin is just kind of like the initiator of sleep. It doesn't actually make you fall asleep, but melatonin coupled with the adenosine is what makes you fall asleep. So when we block that receptor, it doesn't mean that the adenosine isn't building. It's still building under the surface. We've just blocked it. And caffeine has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours. Well, half-life means I'm only processing out half of the volume of this, right? So if I drank 200 milligrams in 4 to 6 hours, my body will have gotten rid of 100 milligrams, right? So caffeine actually can take 10 to 12 hours to fully leave your body. So if I'm consuming caffeine from basically the moment I wake up until I'm off shift, I'm never ridding my body of that stimulant. The caffeine isn't making you awake. It's just blocking that sleepy feeling that you're having. It's not actually making you more alert. It's just making you not feel tired. And so when you go to sleep at night and you've consumed all of this caffeine, well, your body triages what it needs to get rid of, right? It has to triage. So if you have all this stimulant in your system, instead of getting the rejuvenation in stage 4, your body is working to rid yourself of the caffeine, of the stimulant, because you've consumed so much caffeine for the day that it's circulating into your blood. It's all over the place, right? We have to get rid of it. It can't be like, well, sorry, caffeine, just sit there. We're going to work on rejuvenation right now, so just hang out there. Our bodies don't work that way. So we have to process that. So your stage 4 is being dominated by processing out caffeine and anything else you've consumed in that day. Alcohol. If it's close to bed, alcohol robs you of REM, and a lot of first responders use alcohol as a sedative to go to sleep. It destroys your sleep. It destroys your stage 4. It robs you of REM. It depletes your brain of GABA, which helps calm you down. And REM is where we produce dopamine, which makes you feel happy, and serotonin, which helps you manage anxiety and depression. So when we consume alcohol or we consume caffeine in this abundance, or just in general, it's not that we can never consume it. We just have to be mindful and aware of what we're putting in our body and how it has an impact on us. And if you couple all of this with this, Laurie already touched on the sympathetic nervous system being on all the time. If you are sleeping and you're in your sympathetic nervous system, none of that rejuvenation is happening because our body is in threat mode and it has to stay alive. So it can't prioritize long-term recovery and long-term longevity. It can't do the good stages. You're still getting into them, but you're not getting the recovery that you need for your mind and your body because you're in that sympathetic state.
What are the long-term effects of that?
Oh, let's talk about it.
Heart attacks.
So obviously that's a big killer, right? So that stage 4 of sleep, what happens there is so important for your physical recovery. And it's actually your body's natural blood pressure regulator, that stage 4 of sleep. And our blood circulates, we flush all the plaque out from our arteries. And because you are in your sympathetic nervous system, your heart never gets to relax, right? So we see high incidences of sleep apnea because your blood pressure is elevated, your heart is pumping. And when we're in that state, our respiratory system never calms down, right? So there was a study that they did. Well, first of all, shift work has been deemed a carcinogen by the World Health Organization. So sleep deprivation is causing people to have cancer and heart attacks and all of these things. And so that stage 4, if you're not ever able to access it because maybe you need REM instead or whatever, or you're just getting woken up too often, we happen to see a lot of first of all, low testosterone, right? But at the same time, we are also seeing heart attacks. And there was a study that was done in Japan, and it was like 14 years. They made these people sleep less than 6 hours a night. And because of that, those participants were 400 to 500 times more likely to have a cardiac event, which is like shocking. That's a pretty big number. When we spring forward in the spring, when we spring forward in the fall yesterday, when we spring forward, in that one day following, there's 20% more cardiac events reported because of 1 hour of sleep loss, because of the pressure that losing stage 4 has on your respiratory system and the ability to manage your blood pressure and your heart rate and to not flush all the plaque out of your body. So then you think about testosterone levels. I mean, it's very, very, very common for first responders to be on testosterone supplement, or you need it, right? Well, it's not only your sex hormone, but it helps with bone density, muscle growth, clarity, anxiety, all of these things. And so when, like Heidi said, if your body is trying to prioritize processing out caffeine and alcohol, food, whatever it is, well, it's going to prioritize that over making testosterone for you. And so men naturally after age 40 are going to lose 1% to 2% annually. But they also did a study at the University of Chicago where they took 20-something males and they had them for just 1 week sleep less than 6 hours. And just in that 1 week, there was a 10 to 15% drop in testosterone levels, which you need testosterone, right? So it's a cycle. Like, this is what causes a lot of these things. And then you look at cancer, which is a huge thing, right? So not only those natural killer cells, you're losing those, melatonin. So we kind of talked about melatonin and how there's other things that you could do besides melatonin, because melatonin in the United States, we're one of the only countries that we are allowed to buy melatonin over the counter. A lot of other countries, it's regulated by their Food and Drug Administration for a reason. And so every bottle of melatonin that's produced here, no two bottles are the same. So even if they're the same brand, which is kind of scary, right? You are either going to get too much, maybe there's nothing in there, who knows, right? So it's not regulated very well. So, and it's also a short-term thing, right? Oh, you're traveling abroad. Let me take some melatonin because we want to get you back on track with your sleep. Again, Heidi said it's not meant to make you fall asleep, but it's just like the initiator of sleep. So it's going to help you, but that's like a short-term thing. And melatonin can actually exacerbate anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, PTSD symptoms. A lot of times we hear from clients, I won't take it the day before the night before I go on shift because I wake up and I feel really groggy. Well, yeah, probably because you've used too much, right? So our body needs to produce it naturally. And it is also produced by your pineal gland. And it is critical in the endocrine function in helping you prevent and treat cancer, the preventability and the treatability of cancer. So we need melatonin produced naturally to help us fight off cancer. We use it in conjunction with chemotherapy to treat people that have cancer. So where this becomes really, really rough for first responders is your melatonin is stripped away by blue light exposure, right? And exposure to light in general. It's produced when you're exposed to darkness, and then it strips down when you're exposed to light. So a lot of times you're running these calls and you're exposed to a ton of blue light, right? It's on your computer screen.
It's in your lights.
It's in your lights in your home. It's everywhere. On your phone. So this is where we tell people, we totally understand that you cannot control call volume, what kind of blue light you're exposed to when you're woken up. We absolutely get that. But there are some things that you can do to help yourself, right? So maybe you get some blue light blocking glasses, and if you are working in the evenings, you pop those suckers on, you can still see, right? Or maybe you turn the blue light down on your phone because there's features for that now, or you get a blue light blocking screen. They're saying we should replace all the fluorescent lighting with red light, right? Instead of having in fire stations and having the fluorescent lighting like this, hey, put red lights in. That's where you see we can help you with natural melatonin production. And so it's an incredibly important thing to have melatonin produced naturally, and it's like a false response that you get in your body paired with sleep deprivation and blue light exposure. Your melatonin levels are like producing at the wrong time, right? Like we're getting production at the wrong time. And so that's why we always tell our clients, make sure when you're sleeping, you sleep in a dark room. Even if you are PD and you're working overnights, don't be sleeping on your couch with the TV on, all the windows open, all your lights on. Go sleep in your room, turn all the lights off.
Yeah,
you gotta like reset.
Really dark, and you have to have that exposure to that darkness, especially if you're working nights. You have to like go home and be in the darkness for a little bit of time. Like it's not realistic to say, well, I'm going to drive home and it's light outside and then I'm going to get in my bed. And even though my room is blacked out, I'm just going to close my eyes and go to sleep. It's not going to happen because you haven't produced any melatonin for that process to happen. And so we have to like mimic that it's nighttime in your environment, right? Yeah. And so that can be very challenging. There's, it's challenging depending upon what your shift is. And if you're a firefighter or PD, there are different challenges, but there are small things that you can do to really help yourself recover. We can't make it up, but you want to think of it like, okay, when I am sleep deprived or I didn't get good sleep, then how do I recover my body, right? It's kind of like when you have a really hard workout, you have to recover from that workout. You have to do things. You drink your aminos, you stretch, you walk, you foam roll, you do those things. And maybe the next day you don't have a workout that is as challenging, or maybe you do some yoga, you do something to recover your body. It's the same concept. Like when we're sleep deprived, we have to recover, and then we have to think about crediting our sleep on our days off, like getting good quality sleep.
You just need to prioritize it, right? Like we live in this culture of I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, why do we have to do that, right? Like we don't need to do that. So sleep when you can sleep and prioritize your sleep. And there's things that you can do to get good sleep when you're not on shift, so that when you are on shift, like you feel good and you're not like, I got to reach for all the caffeine that I can because it helps me stay awake. No, it doesn't. And so one more thing I want to mention about cancer, and then we'll talk about some sleep tips, is if you are sleep deprived, especially for first responders, because we know all of them are sleep deprived, right? You have a 50% for men, a 50% increase chance of prostate or colon cancer, and for women, a 40% chance of breast cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, which is shocking.
Another thing, you were talking about things we just can't avoid if we're working, but we can avoid if we're laying in bed and we do the 2 a.m. post that says, God, I can't sleep.
Yes.
Put the damn phone down.
Put your phone down.
Yeah, because you're exposing yourself.
Yes, like maybe meditate instead. Maybe practice some mindfulness. Maybe just read an actual book, not a book on your Kindle.
Right. You mentioned earlier this yoga training that you guys just did.
Yeah,
and
it's the coolest thing.
Like as much as I hate to say it, because when I think of yoga, it's just flexibility and breathing.
Oh yeah,
and I'm
we're not doing any downward dogs, no pigeons.
It's not really yoga.
And you're a hippie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be a hippie, right? I'm already into veganism and CrossFit apparently. So, would you guys explain the number one, the modality of the yoga that you're talking about, and number two, what actually it entails and the benefits of it?
Yeah, so Heidi and I recently got trained in a sleep recovery practice called trauma-informed yoga nidra, and again, we're not doing downward dogs. It's none of that. It's a meditation that's been around for thousands of years, and it actually was studied by the military, by Dr. Richard Miller, and the military was like, hey, we're not going to call this yoga because we don't want to do yoga. We don't do yoga in the military, right? But we're going to call it iRest, and it is a proven treatment for PTSD. iRest is. And so what it is it is important, if anybody's like looking this up and you want to try it, to make sure it's trauma informed, right? Because essentially what's doing is helping us access our parasympathetic nervous system to get you out of that fight or flight mode, which we talked about is so important when we need rejuvenatory sleep, right? So it helps you access that vagus nerve. It helps you relax and be in your parasympathetic state so that it will get you into that phase 4 and REM like almost instantly. It is so amazing how quickly this can work for you. And 45 minutes of trauma-informed yoga nidra is equivalent to 3 hours of sleep. So when we're talking about crediting your sleep and maybe getting a couple of extra cycles in there and wanting to produce hormones and all of that, this is a great supplement for people. And it really is, all it is guided meditation. And we are doing a lot of within the meditation itself, it's going to ask you to access different parts of your body and to be present, right? And so we have clients that use it on shift, off shift. It's a great thing to do the night before you go on shift because most people really sleep terribly. It's okay we have police officers that do it in their car. They'll like pull behind the fire station and just sit there where they know it's safe, right? And they will do 15 minutes, right? In 1 hour of trauma-informed yoga nidra, you're going to see a 60% increase in dopamine, which we already know if you're not sleeping, you're not getting the right amounts of dopamine. So this is an incredibly impactful meditation that anybody can use, not just first responders, but to help people prioritize their sleep and get good quality sleep and recover, maybe if you're on shift.
Right. And we want to think of like it as we can't change a lot of these things, and maybe we can't change the fact that you're only going to get 6 hours, but we can change how much caffeine we consume. We can change if we drink alcohol. We can do a meditation, or we cannot do a meditation, right? We can sleep in a dark room. We can sleep in a cool room. We can have no gadgets, not watching TV in bed. We can do the right things to really prioritize that sleep so that even if I'm only getting 6 hours, the quality of it is really good.
It's a good 6 hours.
Well, I'll be honest, everybody knows this. I drink Monster, but I have tried to be real intentional about not having it after 1 p.m.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And and it's hard some days, especially on the weekends. But we use that almost as a badge of honor. You'll see. Look at all the posts. How many people have a bang sitting on a MDC or in their lap in their squad car, and hey.
Well, and it's so accessible because people are just like, it's at the hospital. It's people get it. They're dropping cases off at the front door, right?
I guess I didn't. We have a lot.
Yes.
At DPA, we have cases of Monster.
Sure,
and I wasn't aware that melatonin wasn't.
Yeah.
Because you get melatonin for kids.
Yes.
So instead of melatonin, think magnesium.
Yes.
So there's all
Magnesium is
different
better.
types of magnesium.
Magnesium, theanine.
So there's lots of different
literally
types.
like so many types.
You can go on just like to Google and see, because it really kind of depends on what you want to use it for. There's some that help you find clarity, calming. Like it just kind of depends. There is citrate. Be careful if you use too much citrate. You might have to go to the bathroom a whole lot. So that probably isn't going to help your sleep or your anxiety. So don't
and
consume
there's different ways to
citrate.
consume it.
Nobody
right?
needs diarrhea.
You can do magnesium lotion. You can do Epsom salt magnesium baths. You can do powdered magnesium. There's a mocktail you can make, which is you use 100% pure tart cherry juice concentrate, 1 to 2 tablespoons of that, 8 to 10 ounces of water mixed with 300 milligrams of powdered magnesium.
And when would you
do this?
Use it,
1 to 2 hours before you desire to go to bed, right? Mm-hmm. So that can be really helpful, I think, in officers who are working overnight, right? Because the biggest struggle there is even though I'm tired, you have to get used to sleeping during the day, right? Yeah. And so you're not going to have that normal melatonin production. And so we need to have that dark room and coming home and having like this bedtime routine and drinking our mocktail and like preparing ourselves to go to bed, right? And that, once again, that doesn't always happen. We don't always get to prioritize that because there's other facets of our life. We have kids, we have families at home.
For sure.
Person next door is mowing the lawn. There's all these things that we can't control. But if we can try to do some of these things, it can be very helpful. And so another thing I would mention for like officers who are working overnight is as you get to the end of your shift, start wearing blue light blocking glasses because we would prefer to not have that light triggers cortisol, right? And our cortisol production naturally happens in the early morning hours to wake us up. And because you're getting into that sympathetic part of your nervous system, you're already producing a lot of cortisol. So if we can't break that cortisol down, then we're going to have a really hard time falling asleep because we're too amped up, essentially. Yeah. So I think it's a lot of, I have like officers that will just do this trauma-informed yoga nidra, like even when they come home, they'll like just listen to it when they're in the shower. Like it doesn't have to always be
laying
like,
down.
I'm laying down, I got my sleep mask on, and now I'm ready to do this. It doesn't have to be that extreme, right? But you can incorporate these things into your life just to see what it can do for you.
I want to, and this is totally off topic, and I didn't even bring it up to you beforehand. It just made me think of it. Is so we just recently got a partnership with XR Health and the VR goggle therapy and being in different environments. And and a lot of theirs are breathing exercises and focus and meditations. And I really would like to show you all those at another time because they're very interesting. How would this be different for officers that work and most of their shift is in the nighttime hours?
Yeah.
Because they aren't exposed to as much daylight.
Yeah. So our sleep is conditioned, right? So in the beginning, when you first get on nights, it's going to be rough, right? Because you have to acclimate to being on nights, right? And you have to acclimate in flipping that schedule, right? But it can be done if you can do the right things to condition yourself of like, okay, and I have worked with officers specifically just in this area in counseling of like, this is what we need to do, right? Like we have got to prioritize like when you get off shift, going home, don't go to CrossFit. And then expect yourself to go home and go to sleep. It's not going to happen. You can't do that. You have to get up before your shift if you want to work out and work out before your shift because it's going to put you even more into that sympathetic part of your nervous system and it's going to wake you up too much. Plus, people are drinking pre-workout and then they're like, why can't I fall asleep? Well, because you just drank pre-workout like 3 hours ago.
That's more
I worked it off though.
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way, right? So I have worked specifically. It's like you have to come home just as you would if you went home after work, right? You go home, you eat you may or may not eat depending upon what time you want to go to bed, right? But you're going to eat and you're going to take a couple of hours to just kind of unwind and do some meditation, do some mindfulness, do something like healthy and normal, right? And then, but you're going to be in darkness. We're going to have blackout curtains so that we can try to produce that melatonin and trick your body into thinking that it's nighttime. And over time of doing that, your sleep will get conditioned to it and will recognize that it is nighttime, right? It will start to think that it is nighttime and you will have the opposite thing will happen, right? You will get on board. But what we see mostly with anyone, even like nurses, because nurses work overnight, right? And doctors work overnight.
Lots of people.
They don't do those things. And then they're like, well, I'm not sleeping and now I'm really stressed out and I'm losing my hair and I'm having all these symptoms pop up and I like exhausted all the time. And they also flip their schedules, right? Like, so now you want to spend time with your family. And I'm not saying don't flip your schedule, but you're going to need to take some naps. You're going to need to meditate. If you want to live long term and you don't want to feel like shit every day of your life, then you got to do some things to try to remedy that loss, right? Like you have to recover from the consistent loss. If you don't, then like you're just never going to recover.
Well, and the problem is I think a lot of times like when we tell officers specifically, or even firefighters, it doesn't matter, about these things, they're not convenient, right? It's not convenient to do these things. And so, or that we're not like motivated, quote unquote, to do these things. Well, we have to kind of take that motivation. She's kind of a little bitch sometimes and she comes and she goes. So maybe you need to practice some discipline instead, right? Like be disciplined and dedicated to the process of like, hey, I am a police officer and I am working nights and I have no control over that at this moment. So I'm going to be dedicated to prioritizing my sleep. And that's what this looks like.
No, that's what that'd be optimal.
Yeah, right.
Because it's no different than prioritizing the workout, right? And
they will. They won't miss a workout.
Research actually shows that if you are gonna get less than 6 hours of sleep because you're getting up to work out, it's actually better for your body to get that extra hour. Instead of getting up earlier to work out, give yourself the extra sleep because it's actually better for your body than working out. So Laurie and I do trauma-informed yoga nidra. We did get a certification in it, and we can provide it individually to clients. We also are getting ready to provide sleep recovery trainings for departments, either department-wide or for peer support or for and whoever wants it.
We would love to get in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we have been giving it since we started this process, almost a year ago. It'll be a year in March. We have been giving it to our clients to practice. And I have clients who literally have had like life-changing results from just using meditation and feeling like they have slept better in the last 6 months than they have their entire life, which is pretty impactful. So it is really, really incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I want to talk real quick the correlation with cancer, the cancers and sleep loss.
So I think one of the biggest contributors is the loss of the natural killer cells, right?
And then
combined with
melatonin.
the melatonin, either taking too much melatonin or not producing it naturally, or just not getting the melatonin, right? And then because of the sleep loss, right? Because our body is just consistently over time not getting that stage 4 rejuvenation, which is what's leading to higher rates of cancer. Right. And cancer as a whole and cardiovascular health and suicide have gone up just in our culture as a whole as like the top reasons that people are dying. And sleep really is the last thing that most of us prioritize. Yeah. We will prioritize all of the other things over our sleep. And at some point that has to change, right? Because if we don't, and I think a big part of why cancer too is such a heightened risk is because of the blue light that we're all exposed to with phones, right? Everything we look at is a screen. The screen it's a screen in your car now, right? Like everything is a screen. We are looking at blue light all day long.
I'm staring at a screen now.
Exactly. It creates a false biological response.
It's stripping that melatonin. So we're just not producing enough melatonin, and we can still fall asleep because everybody's sleep deprived, right? So it's not that you can't fall asleep. You may have racing brain, which is also a product of being overtired, and being sleep deprived is being overstimulated, right? And then you add in the caffeine on top of that. But I think a huge contributor of that cancer risk is we're losing those natural killer cells, and because of how much blue light we are all exposed to, we are not producing the right levels of melatonin to really fight off cancer.
Well, and that stage 4 sleep is your physical recovery, and so your body is never being able to recover and allow itself to fight off the immune system dysfunction.
God, I bet those people in the 60s and 70s and 80s before smartphones and computers came about slept pretty hard.
Babies.
No, seriously,
yeah. I mean, it's like so wild when we think about sleep, because like we had mentioned, our grandfather was in the military, and he, like, I'm pretty sure he was like incredibly sleep deprived. Like looking back on it now, he could fall asleep anywhere.
Oh my gosh.
Like he'd be in line at the bank and fall asleep. He one time fell asleep at a stoplight, which is like not okay, right? And he used to always say, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." Yeah. And that is just the military mentality, which has crossed over to first responders. But I think it's even just crossed over to civilians at this point of like, we also live in a culture that's very much like FOMO. Like we have to be involved in everything. We don't want to miss anything, right? Like you don't even want to miss what's on your new Instagram reel.
That's an addiction. I mean, that's a different type of addiction.
That's a different type of addiction.
The phone, though, is probably also like that contributing factor is most people are looking at their phone seconds before they go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
I'm guilty of it too.
I do it too.
Or right when you wake up in the morning.
In the morning, right? And that screen, looking at screens in the morning is okay, right? Because you want the melatonin when you wake up, whether that be morning or afternoon. You want that melatonin to dissipate. So you want the melatonin to go away. So you're not like feeling groggy, right? And you want the cortisol to be there. And so looking at screens during the day and having natural sunlight exposure also helps regulate your body. And so for overnight, having that access to, like right now, it's summer, right? So we have really good sunlight in the evening, right? Mm-hmm. So getting that exposure when they wake up, like actually being in the sun, we wear sunglasses and it does like the opposite from what we want it to do. Like we want that exposure. Don't go look straight at the sun. Right. That's not safe. But like you want that exposure. You want to take it in through your eyes so that it can help later on. It helps with like differentiating between light and darkness. Yes. And so for somebody who's trying to flip their schedule, spending time outside when they wake up in the afternoon is incredibly important. Yeah.
All right, Heidi, I want you to tell us a little bit more about suicide epidemic and what can we do to battle this?
Yeah. So I'm going to hit on this one really first responder specific because there is a huge breakdown in our REM when we have PTSD. So when we talked about REM, I mentioned how we produce dopamine and our serotonin and our GABA. So when we're sleep deprived and we're not getting enough sleep, we're not producing the right amount of chemicals, right? And that can really cause a lot of issues in how we're able to manage our emotions, how we're able to process our day. And when we don't sleep enough, our amygdala is even more likely to hijack our brain, because our brain and our body look at ourselves as being more vulnerable because we're sleep deprived, right? Because when you look at studies of sleep deprivation and what it causes to your mind and your body, like your reaction time is actually slower, like your ability to recall information is slower, and you don't retain as much information like in an educational setting. And so we're at more of a risk, we're more vulnerable to threat. And once again, we're biologically designed to live right now, not long term. And so our brain is going to hijack a lot more when we're in that sleep deprived state, right? So we're just really losing those chemicals. And so when we struggle with depression or anxiety that's untreated, there's such a high comorbidity between mental health diagnoses and sleep disorders. It's 80%, which is actually very high. And so a lot of times we can struggle as clinicians, or as doctors can struggle to identify, like, what happened first? Was it the sleep disorder, or was it the mental health diagnosis, right? Or was it at the same time? And what I usually say to my clients that are first responders is, like, you guys are at a disadvantage because you're experiencing both at the same time. We're experiencing high rates of trauma, and we're also sleep deprived. So we're getting both at the same time. And so not only is the dopamine loss and the serotonin loss and the GABA loss putting us at more of a risk for suicide, that amygdala hijack and experiencing trauma and having PTSD also is a risk factor in it, because when we sleep at night and we go into REM, we are really working to consolidate and process those memories and file them away and really like rejuvenate our brain, right? And rejuvenate all those chemicals. So what happens when we have PTSD and we're sleeping and we're experiencing REM is our brain naturally knows that we have to process out that trauma to live. It knows that this is painful and I need to get rid of it. And so we have dreams. Either we have the exact dream of what the trauma was, or we have dreams that are just distressing. And when we have a distressing or a disturbing dream or a nightmare or even a night terror, what happens in our brain is that amygdala comes online when it's not supposed to be online, because that's the only time of day that our amygdala is offline, is when we're in REM. So you're dreaming and you have this nightmare, and because we haven't filed that dream away correctly in our hippocampus, we can't differentiate between this is happening right now, and so our amygdala gets triggered. And so it sends the chemicals to our body to get into the sympathetic part of our nervous system, or fight or flight, which wakes us up. And so we can experience panic attacks, we can experience nausea and vomiting, we can experience anything, right, in that state, because everybody experiences that sympathetic state differently, right? Just depends on you as a person. Or sometimes that can just even look like I wake up and I can't fall back asleep and I'm not really quite sure why. And I have a lot of first responders that tell me that they don't dream. And they do dream. They're just not remembering them. And that's more than likely because the breakdown of REM has started to happen because of the trauma and the sleep deprivation together. And so they're just not remembering the dreams. But once we start doing ART, a lot of times they do remember their dreams, and they're not negative dreams, right? But over time of that REM getting broken down, your sleep is conditioned once again. So a lot of times then we just start waking up because we're conditioned to waking up at that time, because it's the normal time of day that we've been waking up with nightmares for so long. Or if you work in like if you're on the fire side, you are getting woken up a lot of times routinely for calls, right? So that starts to happen. And over time of being woken up, our REM starts to get fragmented. And so we're not getting as much REM, which means we're not getting as much dopamine, we're not getting as much serotonin, we're not getting as much GABA. And so over time, that PTSD with the sleep deprivation just eats away even more at your REM. And that leaves you feeling like shit, essentially, right? Like I can't regulate my emotions. I'm having so much anxiety all of the time. I feel irritable. I'm depressed. Like you're having all of those symptoms of PTSD mixed with anxiety and depression, and coupled with not being able to sleep. And a lot of times over the course of that happening over and over and over again, then you don't want to go to sleep because you don't want to have the nightmares. Or I don't want to go to sleep because I know I'm just going to wake up again. So I might as well just stay up. Like people think that way when we get into that state. Like I'm not able to sleep, and it's incredible. If you've ever had insomnia, it is awful to lay in bed awake. It is agonizing to lay there and not be able to shut your mind off, because you have to shut your mind off to go to sleep. But when we don't get enough sleep, we get racing brain because we don't have GABA.
The harder you try, the more frustrating it becomes. And it's especially if I wake up like say I have my alarm set for 5 or 5:20 and I wake up at 4:30. I'm already pissed because I know that I'm not going to
Not gonna be able to go back to
No,
bed.
Joe,
and-
you got to do a yoga nidra then, and then you
Yeah.
gotta reset your brain.
Yeah. So I think
or not post,
Yeah,
Get off your
right.
phone.
Get off your phone. Yeah. So that's really kind of the breakdown and some of the reasons that suicide risk is even higher, in first responders because of the sleep deprivation and coupled with PTSD. And so a lot of times I'm like, okay, let's work on ART. Let's do some ART. Let's do some healthy sleep hygiene habits. Let's talk about your sleep. Let's educate you on your sleep, and let's there's just so many things that we can do to help and reset this process, right? But it's like a whole body approach, right? It's not just talking about your brain. We have to talk about your body. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about all of these other things to kind of get you back in this balanced state, because when your nervous system is kicking into sympathetic all the time, we're out of balance.
Well, and I think too, if you're still doing the job, you have to have the tools in your toolbox, right? ART is helpful, EMDR is helpful, sleeping well is helpful, but you have to consistently use them once again, and you have to be dedicated to the process. And if you want to keep doing your job, then you have to know what you need to be doing in conjunction in order to be your best self.
If you want to keep living.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, the thing that is designed to keep you alive will ultimately kill you if you cannot get out of it, right? And so,
and most first responders want to make it
to
25 years, right?
You got a good retirement at 25
want to get
or
their
30.
retirement and live their life. But if we don't start paying attention to these things that are healthy for our brain and our body, then we might make it there, but
it's not going to be good.
We don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're doing the show.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing this episode, to get more of this education out there, and at least give us a perspective. And if we could plant a seed in one person's mind, that's, it's more than when we started this in 2021 that they had in the back of their mind to use. So I'm walking away with this today with a lot to think about.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, I want y'all to kind of leave the listener with a lasting thought or perspective they can, before the music hits, just to leave them with, to think about, to have a healthier and longer life that goes on past this wearing a badge and picking up a fire hose.
Mm-hmm. So I think obviously awareness is the first step, right? Recognizing that you don't feel good or that you are outside that window of tolerance is incredibly important, right? And then doing something about it. Don't wait until you are 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years down the line. Like we're talking about sleep, prioritizing your sleep will prioritize your mental health too, right? And we don't prioritize our mental health. We were talking about, we prioritize fitness, we prioritize all these other things. So why are you not prioritizing your mind and your body, right? So there's lots of different tools that you can put into your toolbox, and they're all available to you, and being aware that you need them is incredibly important, but you also have to be dedicated to using them.
And hope is there, right? Like we said earlier, a lot of times feelings of hopelessness and helplessness are there in these calls that you're running day after day and experiencing sometimes people's worst day. You're a part of that, and that leaves you feeling hopeless and helpless, but there is hope. There are treatments like ART, EMDR, trauma-informed yoga nidra, mindfulness, all of the things we've been talking about, and prioritizing your total body well-being can bring you back to that hopeful place that I can make it to 25 years, I can make it to that end goal, and I can enjoy my life in the process. And so that's my biggest thing, is that there is hope. There's tons of other options than what you have viewed in that deep, dark space of hopelessness. There's always hope.